Thank you guys all for coming. I'm so excited to see all of your faces and to hear all of your cool ideas. And I'm Rika, in case we haven't met yet. Jasmine and I put this together with Sabina, who is just like a wizard and knows how to do everything. And good old Steve secured us some money to do some stuff and make sure people got here without having to spend like $1,400 or something crazy. So I hope we can all enjoy each other this weekend and keep it light and casual and just be humans with each other, public humans, since we're, I guess, members of the public now. And the first talk we're going to have is Bryn and Kate Duffy. They've been doing a lot of really interesting work that they're going to tell you about. But if you are wanting to be an overflow space or wanting to eat outside, we'll also have computers set up for this talk and the following talk in like overflow spaces outside and in the back. So you can have a little bit more space. If you're feeling a little bit like there's too many people, like you can get away for a moment and then we can come back. But any other announcements we need to make, Sabina? Oh, if you are presenting at any point in time, don't worry about it, first of all. It doesn't have to be anything polished or like buttoned up. It can just be you sharing your wisdom with folks, but so that we are engaging folks that are on Zoom that can kind of tune in and out as they please, make sure that you're talking into a mic. If you're talking about anything in a thinky conversation in here, talk into a mic so they can hear you. We have a lavalier mic over there that's like a little teeny. We've got these big mics. We've got that big mic. We've got lots of options. Yes. Never mind. We don't have this one. It's just the lavalier mic. And I'm not doing what I said I should. So anyway, thanks for coming. Bryn and Kate, you got your stuff. Let's do it.
I should talk into this mic? Sorry.
Okay, is it on? I don't think it's on. It's not projecting.
Oh, okay.
If you'd like to also project, you can also use a handheld.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, so you can do both.
This is
Hold on one
fancy.
second. Yeah, just gotta swap this around.
Sorry.
Nah, it's not that fancy, don't worry. Just, let's see. I'll put that on, and you're gonna walk around.
No, I'm gonna stand here. Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's really a pleasure to be back in this space with all of you. Just a wonderful joy. My name is Kate Duffy. I graduated from the program in 2015, went on to PhD in 2021. Today, I am a stay-at-home mom and woman about town, living in Burlington, Vermont. And so I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about what we've been calling informally the Public Humanities Memory Book, but officially its title is The Public Humanities Idea. And so I'm going to be sharing a bit about the thinking behind it and our process of making it, and then I'm going to hand it over to Bryn to discuss the statistical survey project that she's been doing. And also I'm excited to announce that this is not just a book talk, it's a book launch. So after our talks, the books will start to circulate. We will distribute them, and while that's happening, we can maybe do a little bit of Q&A. All right, so the goals of this book. We wanted to create something similar to a yearbook for public humanities, encompassing all the years of the program. So this would be a tone of nostalgia, but also celebration that kind of captures the spirit and the vibe of what it was like to be part of this. And it would also be a little keepsake, something that you can put on your bookshelf to remember the program by. Also, I wanted to create some documentation of the program for people years in the future who might not know what it was and who are wondering what it's all about. And so they can flip through this and just get a sense of it. And it will kind of help share a bit about or they can experience it through the book, what it was like. So to do this, our process was, in the spirit of public humanities, this is a participatory process. So we sent out a survey, and many of you, about 40 people, contributed stories and memories and photos. And so thank you to all of you. The stories that came in were they were beautiful, they were sad, they were funny, and it was just a pleasure to read these as they came in, plus a lot of the photos. So it was those crowdsourced contributions that really helped make the book. And also we had images from the JNBC digital vaults that we were able to include as well. On top of this crowdsourced material, I also did a little bit of historical research into the origins of the program. So I got to look at old documents, including Steve's director's reports from the early years of the program, when he would write these kind of jaunty letters about the things that were going on, and getting a sense of how the program took shape in those early years. And as part of this, I started to realize that our program has taken place totally within the digital era. And you would start to realize how quickly those digital sources can disappear. You would click a link and it's gone. And the Wayback Machine has some stuff, but it's a bit spotty. So as I was doing this, I started to have this sense of trying to hold back the tides as the tide is washing out all these little shards of public humanities, and I'm trying to gather them up before they disappear. So the book has a lot of event posters, screenshots of websites, quotes from old documents and things like that, to just try to preserve that on paper as much as we could. So we've accumulated all this material, and there was a question of how to organize this and how to winnow it down, because we only had 50-odd pages of book to fill. It's a pretty short book. And so because this was crowdsourced, we were, in a sense, building the ship as we sailed it. And so the structure of the book was taking shape around what people were sending in and what people told us was important and significant. So we decided to prioritize student-driven projects, and also to try to represent all eras of the program, so from the beginning to the end, or nearly the end. And it is a challenge because starting around 2012-ish, more and more people have smartphones. And so there's a lot more photography happening in those later years of the program. And so inevitably, it did kind of shift to have more of that, but we did our best to represent those early years as well. Let's see. So, and we also had to kind of accept that it wouldn't be a full representation of everything that had happened in public humanities, that we couldn't possibly include all of that because it's a multiplicity of experience, but it was meant to be more of a representative sampling of things. So finally, we turned all the material over to Erin Wells, the graphic designer. Some of you may know her because she's worked on public humanities projects over the years. And she asked us, what phrases would you use to capture the vibe of this program? And it was Bryn's idea to say, organized chaos. And she really delivered. She worked very, we were on kind of a tight time frame. She did a great job of just turning this into a real book. So the result of this book, so I don't want to say too much about the content because you're about to have it in your hands and you will experience it for yourself. But I do want to tell you a bit about the cover. Whoops, that's the style of my talk. So when I thought about, okay, what image should be on the cover? What came to mind, at least for me, was the Nightingale Brown House, because 100% of students have been in this house. We all share the experience of this house. And yet, looking at this image, I wasn't sure if this was quite the right kind of picture to use, because at least in my day, we would not come through the front door. So this version of the house, this angle of the house, maybe wasn't quite right. And as I was looking through the pictures that the JMBC provided, I came across this. And, and I love this picture because, A, it's the carriage house. So the carriage house was the site of so much student-driven work where the galleries would be turned over to exhibitions and projects and all kinds of wild stuff that we did. And this would be what we would see coming in. And also this vine, I believe this is a wisteria vine. Just this view, so to me it symbolized, okay, here are roots, and then we're growing and thriving up from this place. So then on top of that, Steve, over the years, has asked students on the first day of intro class to draw a picture of public humanities, and he has collected many of these drawings that people did. So we turned that over to the designer, and this is what she came up with for the cover. So that's it. So to conclude, what is the public humanities idea? So the phrase public humanities idea comes from a 2009 document that's quoted in the book, so you can read it. But to my mind, everyone could have their own answer to this, and that's kind of the beautiful thing about a program like this that is so interdisciplinary, that has people from so many different professional backgrounds and so many different viewpoints. And to me, this book was really trying to capture that, to have all those, so many voices represented. And one final note is, if you're reading through it and you're feeling so moved, there's still time to contribute your memories. And we'll share a little bit about that at the end, but we're still collecting memories to be included in the Brown the digital archive of the program. So there's still time to share if you would like. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Fred. Oh, yeah, and I don't want to walk away with the mic. There you go.
Thank you. Let's see if I could just, I don't know, get that. Okay, we're gonna say that's good enough.
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm Bryn. I graduated in 2018. Thank you. My background is in museum audience research, and then I worked for 4 years at a tech company doing qualitative research. So I really wanted to kind of bring that background and experience to kind of thinking about the alumni of this program. Where are they now? What's the impact of the program? So where Kate's work has really kind of focused on what's our retrospective, what are our rememberings of the program. This survey is really kind of where are we now? How have people kind of been reflecting back on the program? So I'm going to chat through some of the results. There's also some charts and reports in the yearbook, as well as I think we have some of the report floating around, and I'm always happy to answer any questions here or afterwards. But you'll kind of see data in this talk and in the book kind of comparing alumni of our program. So we had 71 people respond to a survey that we sent out along with the kind of memory questionnaire representing every graduating class, 14 of whom completed the MA as part of the PhD. And then we wanted to kind of think through not just our program, but how do we kind of compare to other fields? So you'll see some data comparing to public history alumni, a survey run by these organizations, again, just to kind of contextualize the data of where are alumni from our program in comparison to maybe alumni from similar fields. So this map you'll see in the book, as well as kind of a more detailed map of the United States, but I think it's just a really cool representation of alumni are spread not only just across the country, but around the world. Big shout out to Nate putting together the Airtable that we kind of got this data from, making sure that it's up to date. And I think this would have been even more expansive. This is just where alumni are now. It's not even where alumni have done their practicums, where they've worked in the past. So that would have been, even more of kind of collection across the country, around the world. So I think throughout this weekend and beyond, just thinking about building those connections, figuring out where did we all work, where are we all coming from. So even as the program is kind of ending this phase, thinking about how can we continue to build those relationships and those connections, not just in New England and Rhode Island, but beyond. So where are alumni employed? So about 70% of the people who responded to the survey are currently employed in public humanities or a related field. That's self-defined. That percentage is kind of lower than the public history alumni, 87% of whom are currently employed in public history or a related field. But I think to Kate's point earlier, what public humanities kind of means is so broad and wide varying. And so even though we have a lot of alumni working in museums, working in universities, the kind of spaces that we've touched have been beyond that into medicine and health, consulting, public arts, retail. So thinking about how can you be a public human in all of these different spaces, even if that's not necessarily what your job title is. And then we look at career satisfaction. So this we see pretty high. So 84% of people who responded to our survey are very or extremely satisfied with their career, a little bit higher than we saw for the public history survey. People satisfied with kind of their day-to-day work, feeling engaged, challenged, feeling like the work is meaningful, building that sense of community, utilizing their degree. But then on the flip side, I think we do see these dissatisfactions, and we chatted a little bit, and I think these dissatisfactions are not necessarily specific to the public humanities program, right? These are things that we see across the field, the arts and culture spaces, of poor compensation, feeling overworked, not kind of being fulfilled. So thinking about how can we push against those kind of dissatisfactions, how can we all support each other in finding the work that is meaningful to us and thinking about how within our current working conditions we can push for change, or maybe just say, I'm going to cut my losses. I'm going to work in an environment that's healthy for me. And again, pull public humanities maybe into spaces that don't typically have it. And yeah, I think just do what feels good for us so we can feel satisfied and fulfilled in our work. And then last data point that I'll chat through is, how did alumni feel the program prepare them for life after graduation? So this is what we saw kind of the highest levels of agreement with. So 96% of people somewhat or strongly agree that the program prepared them for their career. 92% felt like it was a good investment in their career and future. We saw this again and again, this idea of network and connection. So really celebrating that this weekend and beyond. And I think to the public humanities idea, we saw this sense of, it feels like a good investment because it helped me to develop a public humanities worldview. It gives me a common language to describe my work. What the heck even is public humanities? And being in this space with people who understand that work, who are really going to push you to ask the right questions, to think about your work more deeply, has been immensely valuable, I think, to myself, to other people in this room, and really thinking about the preparation from this program as compared to other programs. I think it's something to celebrate and kind of push for. So, like Kate mentioned, we're going to be collecting more memories throughout this weekend. So if as you're having conversations, as you're talking with folks, other memories kind of come up, you can either use this URL or this QR code that has kind of a Google form survey where you can share things. Don't feel like you need to respond to all the questions, but just if you have something that pops up in your mind, you want to share a story, please do so, and we will add that to our digital archive. Cool. Yes. Oh, yes. Public humanities bookmarks. Okay. But then I think with that, I'll let Kate finish passing out the slips. But then I think we can open it up to questions / start passing out the book. Thank you all. Yes.
I have more questions about the data. Already can we follow up with you?
Of course. Yeah.
I want to know who is all living in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
I can tell you that.
That's what I was going to say. Nate's Airtable is definitely a good resource to kind of know who's in your area, where people worked. I think it has their practicums in there, and then maybe their LinkedIn profiles as well. Yeah. So definitely a great resource. So chat with me about them. Yes.
Is this report just being shared internally, like for us, or is it going externally to other groups?
Great question. So it's both, I think, going to be archived on the website. We have access to the report, and then it's been shared with CSSJ and kind of other departments at Brown who are thinking about building on the public humanities, maybe having another sort of instance, but we also wanted to have it on the website. So as other universities are thinking about developing their public humanities programs, they can kind of look to ours for sort of advice, thinking about what are the sort of benefits and drawbacks of the program. Yes.
I know that we can add some memory archive, which is so awesome, and I'm wondering if we can also still add the survey.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the statistical survey, a link to that is included in that link as well. So they're kind of,
Awesome.
yeah, cross comparison. Yeah.
Can we also submit more photos if we are involved?
Yes. Yeah. So in that kind of link, you'll see open-ended questions, photos, and then we also added an option to have voice recordings. So if that's something you'd like to do, or if you're, I don't know, randomly having a conversation this weekend and you record it, you can upload it to the Google form. Yes.
Was there any, in terms of like understanding the alumni story, were there places where you wish that you had data but it was too hard to find? Like in what, I'm just wondering if there was like, I don't know, like parts of the story that seemed like they would be meaningful, but it wasn't somehow surface.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. We had, like I said, 70 people respond to the statistical survey, 40-ish people respond to the memory survey. So I think that's a good number. That's not necessarily totally representative. And I know some folks who are maybe graduating now have very different experiences than people who graduated 10 years ago. And so I think having more data, being able to think about what are those experiences across the years, how are people who are just now graduating thinking about the program versus folks who graduated 10 years ago. So I think, yeah, it's data that we might have missing, but I think that's a conversation point for this weekend and beyond. Yep.
So if I'm understanding correctly, there are physical copies of these books?
Yes.
Here?
Are we ready for that?
For people who are attending virtually, will there be a way for them to purchase or acquire these books somehow?
Yes. The books will be mailed out to alumni who are not here today. So yes, stay tuned for more information on that.
The books are done. The larger reporting is and this is more, I think, narrative that like being collected or projects that are related.
Thank you so much.
These are little floppies, so.
Classy, even better. They're beautiful. Can these be yearbooks?
Yeah!
Yeah, sign the yearbooks.
Nicole just,
I don't remember.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's our Zoom graduation. Last year. Oh, you were 22? Okay.
They're doing
class because I was like the main documentarian and I didn't submit any photos.
I think I missed a bit too.
I
Because
couldn't,
did submit that
I
as
couldn't
well.
get it. I was like, I don't even know which hard drive this is
It's a good time.
Yeah. I don't want to miss. So I think we'll just be like hanging out, taking questions if anyone has them as you page through, but you just feel free to enjoy and page through as you wish.
How was closely related field defined, and was it defined the same in both of the surveys?
So great question. That was kind of self-defined.
Okay.
So if people said, I work in a closely related fields, they picked that. I don't know for the comparison survey how that was necessarily defined, but my guess is that it was also kind of self-determined. Yeah.
Yes.
Have you thought about sharing the data, like the stories, the data, whatever, on that, like the Humanities for All website people? It seems like sharing it out with other programs more explicitly. Like, I'm thinking about because you shared the public history satisfaction data that all these organizations seem to make happen over a series of years. So maybe this could run something for other public organizations happen over a series of years too.
No. I think having it linked on the website and kind of seeing it both as an archive of the program and its kind of current state, and also, thinking about the future.
Oh, the. Oh my goodness.
Do you remember she started dating that guy? Yeah, but I remember that. He had showed up with some people. I don't know, I'm not looking at the friends across the street. Yeah. She's still like, told you we worked like
And pictures.
when I was still like, yes.
She started a little early.
She's
Okay,
okay.
gotcha.
She left Temple. She's
Yeah, it's a little
she was like
class cabinet. I don't. Yeah, it's hard enough for like time and you brought anything or if you want to bring final
but her husband works up and they live somewhere in the middle.
We also have
Daisy teaches. Right. She has to be there all the time. She's huge.
Did you want to say something, Steve? You're like into that. Yeah.
Her
Okay, so
that
Steve,
quote about
is that
her
level
meeting
here?
oh my gosh.
Just like, can't even. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, yeah. Well, that's more. You want to know more? Yeah. Who is this guy?
Oh, it's just one quick announcement. Thank you, Bryn and Kate, for an amazing project here. There are Stephanie and Julia's project we'll talk about tomorrow, and there'll be copies of that. There's a fourth thing that is being produced that I had hoped to have today that will be available within a week or so. It didn't quite get done. Jazz Johnson, who some of you know, has done an amazing project on the wallpaper, an artist's book based on the wallpaper and her reinterpretation of it. And that's being printed at Bench Press, and it's a really interesting, complicated project. And those will be available. And if folks would like a copy of that, let me know, and we can send those out. So we'll have those in a week or two to share. But enjoy your books. I hope everybody gets them signed. I'm going to ask you to sign mine. So enjoy.
We also have a camera that takes pictures that become stickers. So, yeah. Awesome. I'm sorry, I think I saw someone's hand and I like jumped in. Nope. Okay, never mind. I will say though that we're going right into the next talk at noon. So if you guys want to get up and stretch, grab a snack, grab some water, get some fresh air, we'll be back in here at noon. So we have like a little time. Okay. Yeah, and just be like comfortable. Chat. Look at stuff. Ask questions of Bryn and Kate.
After much ado, any thoughts?
I didn't know I had to be brilliant, so now the stakes are raised. It's incredibly exciting to be here this weekend, and I think by tomorrow it'll be feeling more sad than exciting, but today just feels really exciting and wonderful to see people. And it's really an honor to be here this weekend and to celebrate the program with you. When Steve wrote to me and invited me to speak, I told him, of course, I would do it. But I also told him with utmost sincerity that it was a very humbling invitation. Also, because many of the people in this room know this program more intimately than I do. And because all of the work that I did here, everything that I learned during my time here was through doing work along with students in particular, and faculty and community members. And so it feels a bit like the feminists in the 1970s who didn't want to take ownership of ideas. Like, I really feel like I shouldn't be taking ownership of any ideas. But here I am. So what did I do? Of course, I over-prepared, and I hope that you will bear with me as I read parts of my talk and try and draw some lessons learned from the time that I spent here. So for those of you who don't know me, I got here in 2007. I got here in 2007, and I was hired as the associate director for programs. At the time, as most of you now know, the MA program was in its infancy. The first cohort of students had just graduated when I began, and I was hired to develop new courses for both graduate and undergraduate students, to do community partnerships of various kinds, to coordinate workshops and internships. That would be one of the way of bridging what was happening in the program and what was happening off campus, and then to do other kinds of things that would expand the center's work in the community and on campus. And I had spent the past 10 years, the previous 10 years before that, teaching US history, oral history, public history, and women's studies at a public university in Illinois, mostly teaching US history, like the survey class over and over again. And I was teaching at a really busy commuter school where students were juggling lots of different demands of family and work. And they really preferred a very structured learning environment where course expectations were clearly defined and predictable, and where they could pursue a degree that was going to help them achieve very specific goals. I had learned a lot from that job. I really liked my students. I really liked my colleagues. But I felt ready for some new challenges, and I did what really shocked and appalled many people at the time, including my partner, I have to say, and I gave up my tenured job to come to the JMBC. And I couldn't have landed in a place that was more different than where I had been. Let's see. And I have to admit now, I really had no idea what the public humanities were. As I think about it, I keep thinking about a statement that Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart made in the 1960s when asked to define obscenity, and he says, "I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." And that is kind of how I think about the public humanities. But despite my fuzziness, I was really, really excited about the chance to come here and work on building partnerships, and especially to develop new formats for teaching within a really generously experimental space that Steve created at the JMBC. Thanks to Steve's vision and leadership, we now know that the Public Humanities program here was really at the cutting edge of what's become a much larger movement in higher education. And the program here at Brown, in no small part, is responsible for what we can see when we look at the landscape across the country, a proliferation of graduate degrees, certificate programs, undergraduate programs, public humanities laboratories, co-laboratories, centers, institutes, book series, including one that I started, other forms of scholarship, and more. And it felt incredibly exciting to be part of this movement and to be part of a moment that was ripe with possibility in my own career and a moment of possibility at Brown and in Providence. And I'm choking on. Brown had just completed the Slavery and Justice Research Initiative, exploring the history and impact of the slave trade on the institution. And this helped launch numerous other initiatives across New England. Beyond the specific focus on the slave trade and the contributions of enslaved men and women to the history of the university, this research also, I think, challenged Brown and other sites to re-examine their institutional histories in a more inclusive manner that moved beyond the cultural and economic elite to account for other communities that helped to shape their institutions. In addition, it was also a moment where Providence was is still in the process of rebranding itself as a creative capital with a generation of youthful upstart arts organizations, Waterfire, AS220, Urban Pond Procession, were leading the way. And I think these two things combined, the Slavery and Justice Initiative and this rebranding, was challenging the place of legacy organizations in the city and pushing historic societies, preservation agencies, archives, and other more established cultural organizations to undertake their work in new and more encompassing and more self-critical ways. And within that energy, for people engaged in those efforts, history was creating a usable past. It was offering a source of understanding both about the present and an important source of inspiration for imagining new futures. And I think public humanities entered into all of those different movements. This was a stack of books that I used in my various courses. And when I put this together in a pile, I was just struck by kind of the repetitive themes that emerge when you look at this list around culture, democracy, doing and making together, the power of place, building community, those kinds of threads. So I was here from 2007 to 2014, and I feel incredibly privileged to have worked in this amazingly dynamic and exciting environment, and to learn alongside and from most of the people in this room. So I wanted to, for the rest of this presentation, try and distill what I now think were some of the most important lessons that I learned. What seems now most important about the work that happened here. And so I'm going to talk about 3 specific projects that I worked on and 3 lessons from them. So first, the necessity of breaking boundaries. For those of you who don't know, this is Lou Costa and Cookie. This is a photo from an exhibit at the Barton Gregorian Elementary School, and they're pointing to Cookie, who appears in the photo at a much younger age. So although we know that public humanities has a longer history outside of higher education, within universities like Brown, public humanities really started as a kind of insurgency, a challenge to traditional academic conventions about how to conduct and present humanities scholarship, where that scholarship took place, and who was framing the research. By centering public audiences and emphasizing skills and methods for communicating and interacting with communities, the public humanities promised to challenge the very real borders that too often separate academic institutions from the communities in which they are located, as well as from a broader public beyond. In this spirit, teaching in the Public Humanities program presented the possibility of opening up new spaces for teaching and learning. And as I said, as an educator, this was really incredibly exciting to me. It gave me a chance to expand beyond the walls of the classroom or expand the walls of the classroom and to develop a series of project-based courses that brought students out into the city and in turn brought city residents and their concerns into the classroom and other spaces on campus. These courses became the spine around which I developed partnerships with local organizations that could be sustained over time. But it's also true that many public humanities or public-facing initiatives, including public humanities initiatives at universities, both then and now tend to think of community as a kind of generic, undefined other. It's a concept that gets used in opposition to the university and I think viewed primarily as a potential source of resources and willing audiences. Many cultural organizations share this perspective. As NEH program officer Sheila Brennan noted in a 2016 essay, that framework can be dangerous. Public historians and other professionals working at cultural heritage institutions have learned that by not seeing the public as real people, they have sometimes viewed the public as an unidentified other, she wrote. At worst, this framing of community can lead to practices that are extractive, exploitative, and end up actually harming relationships and exacerbating inequalities. More benignly, perhaps, it's a framework that might lead to interactions that are superficial, perhaps pleasant, but ultimately do little to benefit those communities off campus or to uncover the differences of resources and power that are masked when educational and cultural organizations perceive themselves as separate from the communities that surround them. And this situation can perpetuate a public humanities practice in which the real and perhaps the only beneficiaries are the students or cultural workers who are given the experience of crossing borders and building their resumes in the process. The challenge for public humanists then is to identify and acknowledge those boundaries and to assess whose interests those boundaries serve. Once developing that understanding, then the goal is to create a practice or projects that can transverse the boundaries for the sake of creating new perspectives, new alliances, and new ways of inhabiting the world. I learned this lesson pretty quickly when I decided to design an oral history class that would focus on the Fox Point neighborhood. My idea was that students would go out and interview current and former residents of the area, that we would build a collection of interviews that could be used for research, and that we would produce some public exhibits and programs. But I was brand new to Providence. I had no personal connection to Fox Point other than working at a building that really is on the boundary of Fox Point. And so one afternoon, I wandered into the Portuguese American Social Club on Transit Street. I don't even know if it's still there. And I happened to meet Lou Costa, Mr. Costa, who was from an immigrant working class family who had lived in Fox Point prior to World War II. And he remembered the neighborhood from a much earlier time in its history. He knew this history mattered, and it remained alive to him in many ways, but he feared it was disappearing as people moved away or died. After he retired, Lou dedicated himself to recovering the history of Fox Point by conducting research and building an archive of photos that he borrowed from people's family albums. He spent numerous days every week walking around Fox Point, looking at the houses where he and his buddies had once lived, stopping into Holy Rosary, Sheldon Street Church, hanging out at the social club. And talking about history really helped him maintain his connections to his community. And so he was eager for a connection to Brown, but he was also really suspicious. As in my mind, he was sitting in the corner of the social club and giving me the stink eye as I came in there and was trying to tell people in the social club why their history was important. We got along eventually, and I came to understand that Lou's suspicion was rooted in history. More specifically, his experience with Brown had been one of exclusion. As I learned over time, Brown had been a stable place of employment for many Fox Pointers who got hired to work cleaning dorms, serving food, working on buildings and grounds around campus. But in their mind, Brown had also been a really bad neighbor. He told me that although he walked through Fox Point and along Benefit Street often, he'd never been in the JMBC. He'd tried one time and he hadn't been allowed in the door. He and others of his generation also recalled that although Fox Pointers might have what were not bad jobs at Brown, few were admitted as students. And so they were deprived of a path to upward mobility. And instead, many of the men in Lou's generation enlisted in the military. Those who continued to own or rent homes in Fox Point after the I-95 highway was built in the 1960s, they struggled to keep up with rising rents, real estate prices that ballooned as Brown changed its housing policies and became more lenient about students living off campus. Others lost homes when the university built new buildings that expanded the campus beyond its central core. One Fox Pointer told me Brown was, quote, a big crook that had stolen homes, wealth, and livelihood from his family and from other residents. So although we could argue about the accuracy of the statement, it reflected a really common and profound sentiment that affected how Lou and others in his community viewed Brown, and a sentiment that demanded that as public humanists, we not act in ways that would reinforce those perceptions. And so despite his well-founded reluctance, Lou, Johnny Costa, who's in this photo, who was Lou's brother from another mother, and frequent collaborator, and others from Fox Point soon became important collaborators and frequent visitors to the center, people who were here during the years I was here. Lou would stop by my office often and just hang out and chat. And he really came to feel a sense of ownership around the building. Over the course of many years, public humanities students, including some in this room, worked on numerous neighborhood history projects with some of the Fox Pointers. And we carefully attempted to avoid co-opting the work that Lou and others were already doing to uncover history, and instead to think about how could we develop complementary activities that would touch more people, extend these projects in new directions, and use public humanities resources to help sustain their local efforts. And so one of these projects include working with Lou to turn his collection of photographs that he had borrowed from people, and in large cases Xeroxed from people, to turn that into a dynamic online archive on Flickr. And this is what Lou's collection looked like when we began that work. Yeah, it was a project. In the oral history class, students conducted more than 60 interviews that are now accessible through Brown's digital repository. They completed an oral history-based cell phone tour of Wickenden Street and numerous other projects and research reports. One semester, students in Steve's methods class put on an exhibit that became a real gathering point for Lou and others of his generation who would come and hang out in the kitchen area that was set up in the exhibit. And then for 6 years, we worked together with parents and teachers and students at the Vartan Gregorian Elementary School on a project called I Was There, that connected, taught oral history to 4th and 5th graders who became immersed in neighborhood history that they used to then put on creative projects and performances about the history of the neighborhood. And this was the first of the I Was There classes, which included the exhibit that the photo of Cookie at the beginning was in. And the students in this cohort all were docents at the exhibit opening, which is the white gloves that they're wearing. And yeah, I have to recognize Eliza, who was one of the people who, there she is in the very back, one of the people who curated this exhibit, worked with the students. Megan also worked on the I Was There project. And I apologize for others who maybe whose names I'm not mentioning, but there were a lot of people involved over time. Obviously, the Fox Point collaborations didn't repair the damage that was done by displacement and gentrification in Fox Point, but it helped to make that history more visible. It also challenged the boundaries between the university and the neighborhood, welcoming Fox Pointers into the center, collaborating with neighborhood institutions, and helping to preserve local history. The projects at the elementary school also connected old-time Fox Point residents with the school, which was an important neighborhood institution, and provided ways for students and teachers at the school to feel connected to the neighborhood in a different way. And I would say, I also want to say another benefit, I think, really is the archive of materials. I still frequently hear from Brown students who are working on research projects using the archive and want to interview me about this project or the work that they're doing. So after a few years of working on the Fox Point project, I thought that the JMBC could push further, pay attention to other parts of Providence, build and uncover some new archives, develop some new community partnerships, and take on other issues that were relevant in the life of the city. And I was fortunate to meet the brilliant Holly Ewald, who is here somewhere, who became my teacher and my co-conspirator on this work. As those of you who know Holly know, she started the Urban Pond Procession, an organization that brought together artists, activists, residents in southwestern Providence to celebrate Mashpog Pond. Holly describes herself as an artist and a teaching artist, and she is those things, but I would also say that she's a really extraordinary organizer who was compelled to think of creative ways to bring attention to the pond, which had become polluted after decades of industrial and chemical dumping. So Holly had been working with environmental scientists around the city, as well as activists, artists from the Urban Pond Procession, UPP, who were working together to try and nurture in residents a sense of stewardship and caring for this place. And Holly and I began a series of conversations about what history could add to that effort. Starting in 2011, we began to teach the oral history class together. And for 3 semesters, students in the class engaged with community art practices, environmental studies, oral history as a way to understand what was going on at Mashpog Pond and to connect with the people to whom it mattered. Using archival research and oral history interviews, students compiled their own archive of knowledge and materials that they publicly shared through a variety of different creative means with the hope of inspiring community transformations. And I have to say, like, this was some of the most exciting and out-of-the-box teaching that I had ever done. The opportunity to work with an artist who approached this work with very, very different kinds of educational and creative practices really just made this project work. So one semester, the class's interviews resulted in a pop-up exhibit that we installed at the Mediator, which is a church located near Mashpog Pond. Reservoir Memories, a community collection, presented stories and reminiscences that students drew from about 25 interviews that they had conducted that semester. The installation presented audio, video, text, images, a large interactive map. Out front, we borrowed a biodiesel bus from the Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island, where we displayed text related to the history of the Gorham silver manufacturing plant and its workers. And in the windows of the bus, large silhouettes that had been drawn by Holly depicted some of the designs that were used in Gorham silver. Another semester, and I have to, Maria was part of these efforts. Yeah. Another semester, students used archives to produce a cell phone tour, Mashpog's Neighbors, Stories from Beyond the Pond, which had 10 stops located all around the pond, at which people could hear stories ranging from the site's indigenous history to the history of industrial work at the pond, stories about the West Elmwood neighborhood's destruction during urban renewal, and contemporary cleanup efforts at Mashpog. And in 2014, we created a Mashpog tour for the Road Tour app, and we put up a one-night on-site sound installation in the industrial park next to Mashpog that used to be the West Elmwood community. There's a lot I could say about these projects and this partnership with Holly and UPP, but for now I just want to emphasize that I think the project worked so well in part because of Holly's approaches as an artist and as an organizer. And these projects were really tremendously successful at thinking about ways to use art and history in order to foster a sense of curiosity and wonder. Within each project, we activated this archive of historical sources, combined it with new artistic and creative production, and put that archive along the banks of the pond and in other nearby locations. Rather than telling people what to think, we used these projects and the sound, image, stories, and I think the element of surprise to encourage people to explore, discover, remember, and wonder on their own and together. And and this project, as in the Reservoir of Memories, our first exhibit, these large-scale maps that we used were a particularly powerful way to encourage this process of discovery. And I think about these maps in terms of a concept that Nina Simon talked about in her book, The Participatory Museum, where she talked about the value of social objects in exhibits, describing social objects as the content around which conversation happens. Social objects, Nina Simon says, allow people to focus their attention on a third thing rather than on each other, making interpersonal engagement more comfortable. And so I think these maps, both they brought together people who already had relationships, but also became a way for people who didn't remember a place to enter into a conversation, to ask questions, and they became a stimulus for people to remember together. This combination of history and art, I also think, was really important in terms of moving this work beyond just reliving the past, and instead thinking about how the past could be a source of inspiration for imagining the future. The project was really powerful in helping people by giving them information about what Mashpog used to be like. People who not very long ago had remembered the pond as a place where they could swim, where they could skate. The pond doesn't freeze at all anymore. Where they could fish. There were even immersion baptisms in the pond. All of that history had been easily lost or dispersed as people moved away. And I think created a kind of vacuum in which people couldn't imagine the pond or the possibilities of the pond being a place that where those kinds of activities could happen. So having those stories back at that place, I think, became a way to help stimulate people's imaginations. Around the same time, now I think, I don't know how we were doing all of this at the same time, but somehow we were. I also began to work with students on the Guantanamo Public Memory Program, or project, which was a national and eventually an international initiative to study the history of the US military base in Guantanamo and to look at the varied ways that that site had been used over time. This project was led by Liz Sevchenko, who's a really wonderful New York-based historian whose own career had started at the Tenement Museum. She'd gone on to be the founding director of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. At that coalition, she'd worked with groups around the world who were involved in the preservation of historic sites, many of them places associated with violence and mass trauma, as well as sites associated with more recent collective efforts towards reparative justice and human rights. And when Obama took office, this is like ancient history now, but when Obama took office, he pledged to close Guantanamo, which, as we know, obviously never happened. But that promise spurred Liz and other people at the Coalition of Sites of Conscience to begin thinking about Guantanamo and what might happen next in that space. At the time, as it still is now, Guantanamo was primarily known for housing inmates that who had been rounded up during the US's long war against terror. But they began to think about its use as a prison site as just one phase in a much longer history of that site, a history that included or touched on US imperialism, militarism, the site that had been used to house refugees from Haiti and from Cuba, and had also been a home for thousands of military families and a workplace for many thousands more Cuban residents. So the Guantanamo Public Memory Project started to uncover all of these stories and to try and bring them into dialogue with each other for the purpose of raising public attention to the place and to highlight its meaning and its relevance to Americans. Liz has described this as a participatory memory project, a way to think about how public memory could be activated for social change. As she wrote in a recent book about her work as a public humanities scholar, she said public memory could be participatory. It could break down the distinction between author and audience. It could reimagine who was a stakeholder by identifying shared stakes in the past. It could tap the power of local voices and perspectives while connecting them into a global chorus. This participatory public memory could use the modes and strategies of social movements to build a collective engagement with history, to mobilize people to address the legacies we live with. So a lot of resonance between this project and the way in which Holly and I had been doing the work around Mashpog Pond. For the Guantanamo Public Memory Project, though, it was a much, much larger scale project coordinated by by Liz from New York, who organized campus teams of students and scholars who would undertake research in connection with various stakeholders from different groups. And then these teams would collaboratively produce an exhibit in a digital project. The exhibit would then travel the country, being used in local communities to stimulate in-person events and conversations that connected Guantanamo to local concerns, everything from mass incarceration, the use of torture, immigration, refugees, and Islamophobia. Around the same time that Liz had begun to invite campus teams to participate, a group of Brown undergraduates asked me if I would advise a group independent study project for them focused on the topic of museums and social justice. And so I described to them the Guantanamo Public Memory Project, and they got excited about the idea of adding a hands-on element to their independent study. Several MA students also joined in. I think Nate worked with me on every single project. Thank you, Nate. All the students together worked to research and write an exhibit panel for the traveling exhibit that focused in particular on the experiences of Haitian refugees and the role of Guantanamo as a site of refuge. At the end of the semester, the team from Brown met up in New York with the teams from 12 other campuses. Hey, Nate. So the team from Brown met up with those from other campuses for the opening of the exhibit, which is where this photo of Nate and Raina and Hillary was taken. And we had a conference and an opportunity for a lot of dialogue. A year and a half later, the exhibit traveled back to Providence, where a different group of students organized its display at URI's downtown gallery. They hosted tours for local high school students, put on a conference focused around art and activism, which is what this image is from. So obviously, unlike Fox Point and Mashpog, this is a local history topic. So one of the challenges became thinking about how to identify the interested publics. And so the decision to focus on art and activism and on the on issues about refugees and what makes a refuge became a way to really draw in local people and help them see how the site could be relevant to other work and other concerns in Providence. So as we know, the project didn't lead to Guantanamo being closed down. It's still there, but it did become the platform for some amazing conversations about this site and conversations that brought together people who had intersected with the site in lots and lots of different ways. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about, my last lesson, is about building sustainability through building community. Sorry, I just messed up my pages here. All right, building sustainability through building community. All the projects that I described stretched over multiple years, and they have been sustained. They endure now in digital forms and in the archives at Brown and the Providence Public Library. And that makes me incredibly satisfied to know that not only the materials that students collected, like the oral history interviews, are now in archives, but that the work that students did on all of these projects has also been archived in a way that now I think it creates a document about the life of Providence at a particular moment in time. And obviously I have my own archives, as you can tell from this presentation. And I spent a lot of time as I was preparing this talk looking back over all of my files, my photographs, and text files that I had compiled and written when I was working here. And I was struck by the many, many lists and notes that I scrupulously and exhaustively made as I was preparing to leave Brown in 2014. I was really, really worried at the time about how these projects might continue after I left. And I was thinking about that issue of continuity and sustainability in really practical ways I see now. I was really thinking about how to build structure, how to pass on information in ways that could ensure that kind of sustainability. And in fact, under new direction, new leadership at the JMBC, new groups of students continued some of the partnerships that I described, taking them in new directions. So the work was sustained in those ways. But as I look back on it now, from a greater distance in time and more gray hair, I find that for me, what has endured about these projects is less tangible, more personal, maybe harder to measure, but more meaningful. And I want to end by suggesting that another way for us to think about the sustainability of our work as public humans is through our hearts and our relationships. The habits of mind that we adopt as public humanists and the enthusiasms that we share. The work in Fox Point with UPP and with the Guantanamo Public Memory Project all involved multiple forms of collaboration and collaboration between lots of different partners. And students really were full partners in the process of discovery and learning, working with each other in amazingly supportive ways as they worked together to create programs and archives. And students were learning from community members, as well as offering ways for community members to deepen their own knowledge and advance their own creative, artistic, and historical or activist projects. The projects show me how collaborative community-based efforts can result in something that's much larger than the sum of their parts. And this collaboration and the relationships that it involves, for me, really sits at the heart of public humanities and has remained at the center of my subsequent work. And that collaboration and relationship building seems especially vital now when COVID has given us new tools for collaborating and connecting, tools like Zoom, but also for me really revealed the paucity of those tools when it comes to building meaningful and lasting partnerships. This event would not be the same if we were all in little boxes on Zoom. So it's these relationships that I want to celebrate with you all this weekend. And as I think about the next steps for this public humanities program, in my mind, that is where the future of this program at this moment lies, in the relationships that you all have built, that we have built together, that are going to continue even without our work in this shared space. So I'm eager to stop talking now so that I can enjoy hearing more from all of you about the work that you've done at the JMBC in the years since I've left, the work that you've done outside of the JMBC, and the things that you are going to carry with you that you take away from your time in the public humanities program and will remain with you even after this program ends. So thanks for listening. Steve, thank you for giving me this amazing opportunity to come and work here. And thanks to all of you for everything that you've taught me. I forgot this slide, but I noticed in the book that somebody referenced this. This was from the final class of one of the MASHPOG oral history classes, where we had students doing an evaluation of the class and the work that they had done in and out of the class, and they were just generating the terms that came to mind when they thought about their work. And seems to me like it, really, it's a list of words that encapsulates so well the kind of work we have done as public humans. I don't know if there are any, let me see what's in the chat here. Nate. Oh, Bess. Hi, Bess. Jasmine. Hi, Bess. Hi. All right. I'm happy to do questions. I'm also happy to just give people the chance to go and sit outside and do whatever.
Yeah, sounds good. If at 1, we're going to be starting doing unconference sessions. We have more programs if you need them. It's 101. All right. Well, you're welcome to go outside. You're welcome to do an unconference session. They'll be in here. We'll have thinking conversations. Upstairs on the 2nd floor, we'll have one room that has more hands-on activities, and the other room is for affinity group gatherings. So the first one, I believe, is caretakers in the public humanities. So anyone who's maybe a parent or takes care of a family member, or who knows, if you have a very strong relationship with a pet like I do, maybe that's the one. So we can disperse. Oh, and Steve, yes. Yes.
On the third floor, in the kitchen up on the third floor, there are a couple of things that you can stop by. Many of you know that for at least 10 years, we used to listen to the program Make Mugs. They're all there. If you want to take your mug and you're not here when you please do, or if you want to steal somebody else's mug. Another thing that's up there, which is a project that was done a month or two ago. We conjured from the spirits of the air, the spirits of the Betty Yale Brown House program, and made a sourdough starter. And we have tried the starter, and there are many bags up there for you to take if you remember that. And to test it out, I made bread, which is up there. And how much humanities you need to do would be to ask you to taste the bread and see what you can taste the spirits, what those spirits are.
Are you ready to fail? Yeah.
All right. So welcome to session 1. This is an unconference, so let's think about what that means. Basically, we are just here to have a conversation. Clarissa will start us off with a little presentation about a sort of case study in failure that she has. But I wanted to sort of give us some framework first of all. So basically, mistakes are made. What happens after that? So in this session, we'll be discussing basically what it means to fail in the public humanities, or maybe as a public human, and the different paths those responses we have to failure have led us on. So sometimes we fail, we try again, it works out, it's great. Sometimes we fail, we try something different, it works out. Sometimes we fail again, and we just walk away. And each of those are valid, and they have different sort of results and different lessons that we can take. But it's really hard because we are people who want to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing for our communities. We want to connect with them. And failure can be really hard to accept as part of that process. So I think it becomes something about your identity as well. When you fail as a public human, you feel like you've really let not only yourself down, but all these people. So one of the things I hope this sort of session does is empower us to talk about the mistakes that we've made, or maybe even just some of the things that we've been involved with where it's been out of our control, because that's also really hard to deal with. Maybe the budget's not there, maybe the administration changes. I worked in state government, you get a new person every 4 years and what they want is different. Maybe we misjudge a situation or a need. So those are all fair, those are all experiences that we have. So we just want to work through those, share. No one's doing anything formal. We'll have the mic, and the mic is going to feed into our Zoom. And so we can pass that as round, and just really lean into experiencing this all together. It's kind of catharsis. So I think that's also what this weekend is about, is really just experiencing all the emotions. But Clarissa will start us off, and then we'll just pass it around. There's nothing.
With the mic in mind, can we all move forward so that everyone on Zoom can be a participant?
And sorry, the people on Zoom, you can also unmute yourself and you should be able to talk. So just, if you want to just say staff in the chat, we'll let you know.
Right. So, hello, I'm Clarissa Seglio. I got the MA in 2009 on the way to the PhD in American Studies, and I'm now at the University of Connecticut. And that's enough. We can all talk later about me. But what I was interested when I Googled failure and images is we get this range of, utter defeat, you're marked for life. It's either or, success or failure. There is no other path. So what are some of the maybe just words or associations that come to mind for you when you hear the word failure? Just spitball. What comes to mind? I thought the cameraman was raising his hand, but if you have something that comes to mind.
Disgrace.
Disgrace.
Fear.
Fear.
Loser.
Loser.
Shame.
Shame. Oh, okay, something really specific. I love it. Disappointment. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, exactly. So it's something that permeates not only our lives as individuals, but our relationships, both in and outside of work, this sense of what failure is. And we know it's culturally constructed. We hear a lot of stuff about fail forward, or, you know, the only failure is not to try, or first attempt in learning, right? But it never feels good when it's happening to you. So I wanted to share one of my first failures that has stuck with me and is now actually one of my favorite stories and ways to disgrace myself in public, I guess. So I now work at Greenhouse Studios at UConn. It's a collaborative, interdisciplinary space where I can put into play the things that I've learned here at the John Nicholas Brown Center and through Public Humanities. And I do a bunch of other stuff. But my first project, while I was still finishing up the PhD, was on a digital state encyclopedia. And in those days, that really meant we've got an encyclopedia and we want to put it online. And Connecticut Humanities and the people that are there now were not there then, so no stories out of school. But they had begun the process of taking a literal paper state encyclopedia and putting it online. Grant funding brought myself, Tom Scheinfeld from the Center for History and New Media in, and I worked in their offices 5 days a week. Now, this was a pretty old encyclopedia, and one of the things we noticed was this was old white man, top-down history. And we knew that entries such as those for Native Americans were just bad. And we were thinking about how to bring this to the powers that be. And luckily, we got a cranky hate email from a scholar of Native Studies who said, what you have online is a disgraceful colonizer, racist, bigot description of Native American history. And I was like, thank God, you are right. And so we did what good public humans do. We said, thank you. Your critique is something we've been thinking about. We need to pull together the community that owns and lives and breathes this history. With her help, Amy Denowden, this was her letter. With Amy Denowden's history, we were able to connect with Ruth Garby Torres, shown here, Rudy Lamb Richmond, educators, activists, tribal members, and also those working in the state's institutions dedicated to the telling of the stories of the indigenous people of the area that is now called the state of Connecticut. And together with them, we came up with ground rules. What did they want to see in the state encyclopedia when it came to Native history? Some things holistic. It's not just in that Native Americans tab, right? That Native histories are in all histories. And what are the alternative periodizing? In other words, before colonization, after colonization. Why is colonization the important breaking point? And why does that then dictate the rest of the story? And always to ask, where is Native history in this? Privileging Native voices, not only for Native histories, but the telling of other histories. And how did we do? Well, first of all, before we got our group together, we thought we were pretty well informed that we needed to be careful not to represent one tribe at the expense of the other. Connecticut has 3 state
recognized tribal groups and 2 federally recognized groups, as well as tribes that have no recognition, but thank you very much, they exist, and as well as indigenous community members from other areas. And so we thought, okay, we'll be careful and we won't pick an image that represents any one group. First of all, and we thought prehistory spoke to the longevity of the presence of indigenous peoples on the land. Our group said the first thing, which we never thought of, that's a boy's toy. What about women's history? So this plum for net and anchoring was perceived culturally as a very masculine object and a masculine history. So our predominantly female group was like, no. And our idea to speak to history that stretched way beyond white footsteps on American shores reinforced for them the idea that Native history is in the past. And so we said, what do you want? And so the group brought in family photos. We want something that's historical, like not the here and now, but still is a slice of almost contemporary American family life here in Connecticut. And so through their graciousness, they shared a lot of images. And in fact, they really favored this image as it spoke to rites of passage, it spoke to joys of childhood, and it spoke to the ways in which culture continues to be passed on in the presence within the family and within meaningful rituals and community life. And of course, our larger board of directors said, oh, hell no, right? Philip Deloria playing Indian. So this was kind of a non-starter from the all-white managerial team. And this is the image that we settled on, that almost everyone was happy. We still got pushback from the board. I even hate to say it. This does not look Native American. Well, what the hell is Native American supposed to look like in your imagination, right? And we say, good, productive dissonance. If someone comes to this page and says, whoa, wait a minute, that's not what I thought I was going to see, they're going to be ushered into, hopefully, a more open mind. That was a success. Another success was each theme. So we were divided by towns. There's 169 towns in Connecticut. We don't have a strong county governance system. Topics and people. So under topics, to make sure where is the Native history in this, we, from poetry and prose to orature, a term for the rich traditions of oral expressions in Native American and other cultures. Native American was the preferred term by our particular group. So that was a success. Where did we fail? Towns. Very meaningful to Connecticutans, but Montville is a town, and it's home to the Mashantucket Pequot peoples and the Mohegan peoples. They're federally recognized reservations are sovereign states. They are not synonymous with the town of Montville or the other ones in the area. So we said, we need to add to towns the core sovereign nations and reservations. They should have their own entries. This seems pretty easy from a technological standpoint. We just create a page. But conceptually, the pushback was, there are a lot of places. Anyone heard of Mystic, Connecticut? That's not a town. I live in Broadbrook. I have my own zip code. It's not a town. There are named places and census recognized places in Connecticut that are not towns. I pay my taxes to a town. I am not a town. And oh my gosh, if we include them, we'll have to include all these other places. And we don't want to do that. Was anyone beating down the door? I want the Broad Brook page. I kind of don't think so. But try as we might, we could not convince them that this was legit. You know, could we, well, it says towns. Well, we'll call it places. Well, now then you got to do, you know, all the other places. Well, can we just call it towns? And who cares if the federally recognized sovereign nations are under that heading? Can we do this? We'll make a new tab that says federally recognized places. It was just not going to be done. And so to me, and how I felt to our constituents and trying to get the link open, how I felt in honoring what our constituents wanted, that was a failure. Other failures. Sorry. Sorry, folks. Where am I? I want to get actually back to the slideshow. Yeah, there we go. Thanks. Anyway, this project started in about 2012, 2011. The website's still going. It's still expanding. But what Annie talked about, sustainability of community and how does the work live on? Pre-colonization and settlement. Like I cried. I did not know this was up here till this week when I put this together. And I just cried when I saw that the history of what our group had done had not carried forward. Where we were absolutely successful was if you call up environmental history, there are Native only focused stories. If you call up women, if you call up education, if you call up belief, if you call up popular culture, tagging made it easy to surface any story that would be on the Native American page in multiple pages in multiple places. So that was a win. My takeaways, that the willpower was not there to make what we thought were simple changes. My takeaways were bringing in stakeholders before the website architecture is set, using iterative design processes, and getting feedback on wireframes. The issue of sovereign nations and reservations not being synonymous with towns that they either lay within or straddle would have come up if we had been thinking about this earlier on, and it might not have felt hard baked into the architecture. How do our core learnings and commitments persist after we leave? This was grant funded work. When the grant was done, I was gone. And we didn't really have a transfer of that knowledge, as I now recognize. And who is accountable? And who is accountable when that person leaves? How can we foster that kind of institutional knowledge carrying forward? On the good side, power shifts over time. I know a lot of people, the new people who are at Connecticut Humanities now, and some of them have deep roots in the indigenous communities in the States. And now that I'm a professor at UConn and I know the director who has worked with the indigenous communities, I can send the what the F email to him about the, what do you mean pre-settlement? I mean, pre-colonization and settlement. Let me remind you, you were one of the people we reached out to. We got to change this page. And so over time, things can get better. And I've definitely carried this knowledge of who are we consulting when we begin designing any digital project, who are vulnerable and marginalized stakeholders that we don't know enough about how they want to be represented, that we need to invite in before the design gets hardwired. And now I look forward to hearing, and I hope we will share some stories of failure and maybe even triumph in the end.
Great. So obviously, I think if anyone has any specific questions for Clarissa about the project or about that experience of failure, we can start with that. But then I'm very much going to just start passing the mic around and like, what is your failure?
Yes, let's do it.
Oh, sure. So does anyone have any questions or feedback? Does anyone have any stories of failure you'd like to go ahead and share? All of mine are related to registration, which is not interesting outside of anyone who wants to be like, Artex is not a good company or something. No, they're fine, they're fine. We need to not get sued over that. But yeah, so what do you all think about failure in public humanities? What are your things that didn't work, things that you tried?
Should we just hoist the mic onto people and we can hot potato it?
Sure.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll put my mask on before I start circulating. I found with students I really have to yell. It's a problem, but just let me know if you can't hear me. But yeah, the people have.
You gotta hoist. You gotta just give it to somebody.
All right, Stephanie, if you want to.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Fortunato, class of 2008. I have had the pleasure of failing a lot in public because for 13 and a half years, I worked at the city of Providence, which makes you very visible when you are doing good work and also when you are not doing well or when things don't work out as expected. I'm struggling with two examples to share with you. One from this morning. This morning, I received an article from one of my former colleagues at the city that the Christopher Columbus statue that the city of Providence owned is going to be installed in a public park in the city of Johnston. I think they're going to have a big celebration. So it is a public park, so I think it's fair game. But anyway, that also maybe is being recorded, so maybe I'd be quiet about that. But I will say that one of the proudest things that when I look back on my career at the city of Providence, the thing that I am proudest of is our commemorative works policy, which was really created very closely with the public humanities program here. Lots of students over many generations actually contributed to that. And when I left, I was feeling really good about the commemorative works policy because we had passed an ordinance and we had put it into the works. And one of the first things that we looked at was the Christopher Columbus statue. And we had this very smart group of very smart, historians and community members who had argued for the sale of the Christopher Columbus statue. And whatnot. So I left feeling pretty good. The statue was going to be sold, but you can never control what happens in the marketplace. And we knew that. We knew that at the time. And what happened in the marketplace was that the statue was sold to the former mayor of Providence, an Italian-American, who bought it for $50,000 and is now installing it in the city of Johnston. And so all of the disclaimers and qualifications that the committee had wanted to put on the sale, that it would not be able to be in public view, are actually being undone at this very moment. And so I will find a way to talk about this, study this, I don't know, somehow reflect back on this, but right now it just feels good to say it to all of you that it feels like a failure, and it also feels like, the culmination of a lot of hours of my life and work and community members. And anyway, it feels wrong. So I'm going to work through that with all of you, I hope, in this very generative, supportive place. So thank you for opening this up. Am I supposed to just voice? It seems cruel to do it to you, Bryn. I'm going to go back to Diane. Sorry.
I'm Diane O'Donoghue, and I know some of you, but not all of you, certainly. I was visiting professor here, still have one more month in that role, starting in 2017. I run the program for public humanities at Tufts, and I came here to learn about public humanities, and did. I'm an art historian, an archaeologist by training, so this was a big learning curve. I expected to kind of apprentice here. Didn't expect to get to teach lots of stuff and meet lots of amazing people along the way. My failure story is a little bit different in that it shows how success and failure can often be very, very closely aligned. So I've been lucky with my public humanities projects. I have always ended up falling grossly short in my funding. No one really ever told me how to adequately fund these projects, because before this I was quite good at funding my own research and got, some of the usual fellowships along the way that academics do. And so my lowest point in this was to strategize a Tufts University gathering of deans and work the room in order to come away with enough money to do the next part of the project I'm doing right now. And I felt like this is really tough, and I need to figure out the next time how to get more money. Because if you do a project that people like, it generates more programming, it generates more desire to do things, and you have to have the money to do that. And Steve, I never learned that, even here. So I don't know, is that like victory of your own success? I don't know what it is, but I've always struggled with the money side of things with my work. So I hope I get better at that. But anyway, yes, so I think that there's a relationship between success and failure that's quite intimate in some ways.
Right.
I don't know.
Sure, that's quite all right. I feel like Bob Barker. Mostly my work has been exhibitions. So after Brown, I was hired as a curator at the Long Island Museum of American Art, History, and Carriages. And so this small story pertains to that latter category of carriages. So not necessarily the most public interactive thing with carriages, because they're generally behind like a velvet rope. You can't climb on them, you can't get in them. Nobody sees them on the streets today, aside from maybe if you're in a park. And so they're a little bit hard to connect with, as well as sort of really the pre-automobile history of transportation. And so being the only curator at this museum, ideally we wanted something that people could actually interact with from that time period. And one of those possibilities could be a horse-drawn streetcar, because that's the dawn of public transportation, the dawn of mass transit, aside from railroads. And so, by coincidence, found a guy in Michigan outside of Detroit who had more than one, and he was looking to find a home for it. And through a very long, complicated series of conversations, one of those horse-drawn streetcars ended up by coming to the Long Island Museum in the fall of 2019, I want to say. And there were all these sort of plans and so it had been repainted. It had actually been in the movie Hello, Dolly, as one of like the horse-drawn vehicles kind of just going around and around in the background as Walter Matthau and Barbara Streisand are hating each other. And so since it had been repainted and it was in fairly good condition, this actually means you can actually get on it. And so it's no longer like a historic surface, so you can't touch it. And so there was our education department was really excited because it's a streetcar. You can fit like 24 people on it. And so that means that, school groups are like the lifeblood of museum education programs. And so there was this whole possibility of, oh, great, we can have like an entire class that can be able to climb on this thing. And you can talk about like the horse-drawn vehicle era. And that was the promise. But of course you need once you have the object and you have the idea, you still need lots of money to follow that. And so we succeeded in getting it from Michigan installed in physically into the building, but then things just kind of stalled, and it literally just remained parked in the aisle from which it had sort of entered the building with news stanchions around it, because it's like, well, we can't just create an exhibition around that. We need to create a larger exhibition in sort of that entire room for which this will be integrated into. And so it's like the project kept getting bigger and bigger, which means it needs a lot more money, which means it needs a lot more time. And so you get an NEH planning grant, then you'd need to get a NEH like design and implementation grant. And it sort of goes from like something that maybe you could do in like a year or two, if it was purely an in-house project, fairly cheap, into this large like 5 to 10 year plan that partially because of the pandemic just never happened. And so I'm proud to have helped acquire like a rare form of vehicle, but it hasn't really found any use. I mean, during the pandemic, the education department was able to do like virtual learning, and like, you know, a educator would be standing in front of it and being able to talk about the object. But that interactive experience that was mentioned earlier today with Annie and trying to create like, opportunities for interaction through things, that's unfortunately never took place. And so, and then I left, and then the pandemic happened, and then I left Long Island Museum late last year to move on to a new project, move on to a new institution. And so my replacement's background is in art history as opposed to history. And so then that's what happens whenever you have like a change of jobs, is whoever else comes in, that's not necessarily what they want to advocate for. And so then they'll push in a different direction. So I imagine if I go back there in 5 years, it's probably still going to be sitting in the aisle with the stanchions around it, you know, like where one day something may be done that's much more useful to it. So, you know, fingers crossed for that. But it's sort of a project that unfortunately never was able to take off. So.
We can keep foisting, or if people are inspired and want to raise their hand, that's an option.
Does anybody want to volunteer or?
Me, I want to volunteer. Okay. All right. So this one I haven't gotten over yet. I work at an institution called Site Santa Fe. It's they're insistent that they're not a museum. There's no article. It's space for contemporary art, which I have asked many times, and other people have asked, isn't that a museum? And I say, sure. But in that role, I've done digital storytelling and membership engagement. And now I'm just in the digital storytelling realm, in part because of the next story. So I was not post-pandemic as in it's over, but post-pandemic as in the era of the pandemic and now. Once we started being able to have collective events, I started doing membership events. So the first one we did was a drag show with an organization called Saints Ball that's like Albuquerque drag everywhere, and they're delightful and they're creatures, and they gave us a great show, and it like really started to boost the membership numbers and fill membership with a different constituency than it had been before. So then we followed it up with a different, just because I am in the drag spheres, then I ended up meeting another queen who was like, I want to do an evening of queer indigenous kinship. And I was like, fuck yeah, let's do it. So we did that, and that was even more successful. And it was like a super intergenerational audience. It was like very diverse in terms of gender expression and racial identity. And like, it was very well received. And then I was like, I'm on a roll, let's do a third one. And I met this woman performing at Meow Wolf, if anyone else knows Meow Wolf in Santa Fe. And she was like the most captivating jazz singer I had ever seen. So I was like, we've got to get this woman, Jasmine, we've got to get her at Site Santa Fe. So I invite her, we plan this event. There's jazz at Site Santa Fe all the time. So I was like, this is going to be like the perfect event. She's so talented, and this is already like within a constituency. What I had forgotten or just didn't fully encapsulate is that Santa Fe is racist as fuck. So I brought this woman. She was incredible. We had half the audience just totally enraptured by her, and the other half aggressively talking the whole time. And as like somebody who's supposed to be kind of facilitating this event, we had members on both sides who were like very angry. Some that were audience members that were like, these people will not shut up. Like, this is so disrespectful. And like, I thought this was a more progressive institution than this. And then the other half that's like, I can't believe you brought this here. I just want to talk to my friends. That's what this party is about. And you have this person here who's saying anti-American things. And I was just kind of like frozen in the moment of like, I truly did not anticipate this kind of reaction to jazz, which to me, I was like, this is not going to be controversial. It's jazz. Like everyone, it's just nice. And she's an amazing performer. And afterwards, I was still like, I don't know what to do about this. I have since like
just reorganize. It wasn't like a failure where they're like, you're demoted, but it was like somebody above me left and then they reorganized things. So I didn't have to do that anymore because I was very like upset by that interaction. And since then, the person who does it was like, I think I would have like wrote down everyone who had a negative comment and called them up and tried to smooth everything over. My priority was just like making things good with the artist because I was like, this is not the way I wanted to feature you, and that's not what you deserve. And I hope this like catapults you into different professional scenarios with people who are going to be so much more respectful of your talent and time and presence. But also I was like, maybe museum membership is like not my jam because like these people suck. Not all of them, but like enough of them fucking suck. So that's my failure. Would anybody like to be foisted upon, or should I just you can also decline.
Well, I'll just say something brief. I'm Katie Vogel. I graduated in 2017. This is really awesome. I really appreciate everyone being so vulnerable. I'm not gonna share a story because I'm actually like still going through it and I haven't like reflected on, I'm like not at that place where I like can tell the story and like know how to tell it. But I guess I have a question of, no one has to answer this directly, but just something to like put out there, of what if a mistake that you make and that you know and acknowledge causes distrust, and then you still have to stay in a community together. And I'm having a really hard time with that. I've apologized, and I am thinking through how I did something wrong. And I guess the person that feels distrust toward me is not ready to move on. And I respect that, and I'm trying to give space, but it's hard to like still be in a community together. So if anyone like wants to talk about that or has a story related to that, that'd be helpful.
I don't have an answer to that. But we can let it percolate, I guess.
Absolutely.
But I understand, I relate to what you were saying, your first piece about like kind of being in failure, or like I feel like I'm in the process of failure sometimes, or it's like living in it, so it's hard to reflect. But so post public humanities, most of my work has been at the African American History and Culture Museum at the Smithsonian. Been working on a really large exhibition that will open up in December 2024, and it's pretty unique in the sense that it's really collaborative. So we have collaborative or contributing curators from different institutions around the world. And I think pretty early on in this process, I think my boss said something like, oh, this exhibition will be like an experiment in failure. And I was like, dang, it's kind of tough. All right. I was like, I guess my work's not very good. But it's true in the sense of like, we have so many collaborators with different opinions, and you don't really come to a consensus, particularly around the subject matter we're working on, which is around slavery and colonialism and the afterlives of those things, right? And so in a sense, it's like you always know you're going to kind of let down somebody, right? The thing that they advocate for, and not, the nature of making exhibition in general, not everything comes in, but something when it's collaborative, it's tough. And so that's been something that's just been interesting to kind of producing into knowing like, I think this is good, but I know so-and-so over there is going to be like, oh, where's this? This is hurtful, or the absence of this is upsetting. And so that's just been interesting. And we've drafted our script, and right now we're getting all of the feedback, which has been really great. But difference of opinion. So I got some feedback that was kind of scathing in some ways, and just like a little snippet into that was one of our contributors didn't like this story that we have around a head wrap and sort of the practices of self-fashioning and kind of remaking and making culture through clothing, which I think is a lovely story, but they have their own opinion on that, which is fair. So I was like, dang, I guess we failed in that sense. But yesterday morning, I met with the artist. We're bringing in a woman's work. She has a turban company, and actually Susanna, I don't know if she's over here, Susanna from Public Humanities introduced her to us. And so we told her, we want to bring one of your pieces into the exhibition. And she just cried and was like, when she started her business, instead of making a business plan, she had like a dream plan. And her dream was, I want one of my pieces in a museum. And so I just thought about, someone else's failure or our failure at one point. It's like a success on the other hand, it's particularly for this person, she was saying like, I just feel like all of my hard work is paying off. And so it's interesting to like fail in some ways, and the other side of the coin is like a major success. And just to know when you're kind of in the position of facilitating, to sit with both of those things. So I feel very much in that process and thinking about them like maybe at two sides of a similar coin.
My first 2 gigs out of the program, I quit. So I quit 2 jobs that on paper were perfect in the first year after the program. And for a long time, well, by the time I quit the second job, it stopped feeling like failure a little bit, because quitting that first job was incredibly difficult. I was physically sick going into work. The work wasn't that stressful, but I had horrible bosses in both situations who were bullies, and thinking that I failed, that I wasn't tough enough, that I wasn't a fit for the culture of the place. And now kind of past that, moving through freelance work, where I could choose who I worked with and having time to see that it was a good fit for the values and the culture of feedback. And now in a gig with a wonderful boss, unlearning all of the kind of things that I had learned to protect myself in those places, and knowing that ultimately, if I'm able to, there's always that option to step away, and holding on to that and reframing that not as a failure, but as towards something else.
I have another one if somebody wants that safety. So I'm always happy to share another one before.
I love it whenever someone has like a little bit of weakness, like in class, someone like grabs the pen, you're like,
Oh man, hi, I'm Erin. I was class of 2019. It's really nice to see and meet a lot of you. Man, so much has resonated. I think especially this sort of like being in process of failure. I feel like on several projects right now, that's just the vibe, and it's okay. But one that comes to mind that I think I've both processed and not is I was teaching a class in the fall of 2020 that was about sort of the afterlives of Japanese American wartime incarceration. And it was 2020, we were on Zoom. I had a bunch of freshmen who were still at home. They were taking like one class, but hadn't moved to campus yet. And the final project was going to be an oral history exhibition of interviews with elders who were survivors of incarceration camps. And it was great. The students did a really great job. They built these beautiful relationships. And then I got an email after we published it as a tiny exhibit, where it was the younger sister of one of the narrators who sent this like heartbreaking email about how upset she was and the whole family was with the exhibit. And my first reaction was like, I felt horribly guilty and like I had done something terrible and caused all this harm. So I took down the story and sort of started processing. And the more conversations I had with this person, the more it was like, oh, this is a lot of family dynamics that are here. This younger sister was born after World War II. And so she was reading this, like listening to this story from her older sister, and was disappointed in the story that was being told, wanted it to be something different. And it was a really just kind of like fascinating many levels of failure on both, and mostly being like, wow, I just didn't think about this ahead of time, that like, of course this is going to happen. And so how am I preparing my students? How am I preparing myself? How are we talking with the narrators to just navigate this whole process? So it was a really good learning experience, and one that has continued because my work is very embedded in community and in storytelling around trauma. And there are always folks who are unhappy. And so I think figuring out like navigating those relationships and having just the conversations and going slow, I think has been really important. But this happened again with another project that I was involved with like a month ago. So it just is an ongoing process too. But yeah.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, more failure.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing where like the more you begin to think like, because I remember like when signing up for this program, like do I have any failures? And then I'm like, I don't know. And then actually just sitting here, I'm like, oh, yes. Okay, so here's a good one. And it's about essentially who owns history, who owns the right to images. And so one of the things I'm really proud of at working at the Long Island Museum was I curated an exhibition called Long Road to Freedom, Surviving Slavery on Long Island. And after the exhibition opened in, I think, 2018 or 19, it's getting a little fuzzy, pre-pandemic, I started then working on a book project because, I was working on like a temporary, changing exhibition after changing exhibition. And even if it's a really good exhibition, it's still going to close after maybe like 3 or 4 months. And then everything just kind of goes on the shelf, everything gets returned, that's it. So it'd be great to have some sort of permanent record of that show. And one of the, so I started working on a digital version of that book as like a PDF. And then if we could get enough money, then we might actually print a book like we were able to receive today. And so that also became like a really good pandemic project for working at home. And so one of the standout objects in that exhibition was a portrait of somebody painted only a couple years after they were emancipated. Her name was Tamar Wren. And she was painted by a professional portrait painter who happened to be related to the couple in whose home she worked and whom were her former enslavers. And so it is the only known, it's one of the most important paintings, I would argue, in the history of New York State, because it's the only portrait by a professional artist of a person of color so soon after they were enslaved. So it is a very rare painting. And the thing is, that painting is still owned by the family who enslaved that woman. And so in particular, it was owned by like a nonagenarian woman who had found in the attic when she was a kid of the family ancestral home. And so they were very protective of this painting, and I imagine slightly embarrassed, but they were willing to lend it to the exhibition because the museum had a long-standing relationship with this family over the years. In particular, the son of this woman was really a big advocate. He was an archivist by training, and so he really convinced his mom to lend this painting to the show. And so naturally, that was an image that I wanted to include in the book because this painting needs to be seen by more people. And so I put together like the PDF mock-up of the book, and the painting was naturally on the cover. We had actually photographed it like 30 years before for something, I don't know what. So we had like a color transparency of it. And I had reached out to the family to get photo permissions to include this, to be able to publish this PDF. And weirdly enough, didn't hear back from the family contact. And I didn't know that he had died while I was working on the PDF, and just of age. And so I never technically got permission from the family before the PDF was publicly released with that image on the cover. And then when I reached out to because then I needed photo permissions for an actual print publication. So you had to go back to all those people who to get the print rights. And so when I reached out to the family again, they were actually slightly cross, to put it mildly, that I was using their image without their permission. And then so it's this interesting thing of like, well, who owns this image? They own the original artwork. We paid a photographer like 30 odd years ago to photograph the painting. So is it in public domain? Who owns it? And I wanted to fight for the right to get this image out there, because you can Google it, and I don't think you can really find many examples of this painting out there. And since the exhibition came out, we had gotten requests from various institutions or individuals who wanted to use that image in publications or in exhibitions around the state of New York. And we had to just sort of say no, and so the family basically wanted the image completely removed from the publication. They wanted no mention of it anywhere. And they didn't even want to be referred contacts by people who wanted to use that image. And so the PDF is still live on the Long Island Museum's website because we never took it down. And so you can go there, and if you can see the image of Tamar Wren, but unfortunately it didn't make it into the print book, which was then distributed to all of Long Island public libraries. And when I left the Long Island Museum, part of me really wanted to just create a Wikipedia page and like dump like the high-res image out there. But it's that larger question of, who owns like the visual rights to the past? And when the owner of that painting passes away, I know that her 8 children plan to fight over the painting, and it'll probably end up by being sold to the highest bidder. And that's also another thing, because I think the family sees the painting as being like a huge financial asset, and it probably is. But also, yeah, so what happens then? And so I was just trying to do what I thought was a very good thing, and sort of sharing knowledge and sharing art in hopes that it may be of some use. And in that case, sort of the claimers of that ownership said no. And so how much do you fight that? Because that was, and so like my boss, who was the director of collections, like said, no, sorry, like you can't do that, because like we don't want to basically anger this family, because they were the Smith family, which is like on Long Island, there's a Smith town. Like they're one of like the dynastic families on that island. And so that means that they're politically connected. They're fairly wealthy. And so like, if you're a local museum, do you want to pick a fight with the Brown family here in Providence, for example? Like, yeah, sure. And it's been, yeah. So but like, if you do that, you want to have like other people standing behind you. You don't want to be like that rogue person who's like, yeah. So anyway, so that's a failure of mine. So.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. I hope everyone got out of this conversation. First of all, be kind to yourself, self-care, forgive yourself. You want other people to forgive you, but forgive yourself for making a mistake. And also recognize that you have all these people here who you can like call up and be like, oh my gosh, this is happening. So yeah, this is great. I appreciate everyone sharing. I appreciate Stephanie that you being like a first voice there. So, but yeah, thank you so much. And I guess next up is intersection. So.
Hi, my name is Eliza Schiff. I graduated in 2009 from the program, which makes me feel like it's a really long time ago. And I have been working as a public art consultant. And when I was here, some of my classmates did an exhibit called Art Plus History. And I didn't help with that exhibit, but I always remember that. And for me, the public humanities itself is an intersection. So I don't even, I think about these things that are intersections, and I still think of them within public humanities, encompassing the intersections kind of is public humanities. And a lot of the projects that I do are art with something else. A lot of the projects are artists interpreting history, artists doing community building, or artists creating places. And this particular project was, I guess, the intersection of art and healing, we would say. The way that the project came about was on February 14th, 2018, there was a school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And very soon after, in April, actually sooner than that, right afterwards, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is in Parkland, Florida, but the student body comes from Coral Springs and Parkland, which are just 2 towns right next to each other. And the city of Coral Springs contacted us, the very small, like 4-person public art consulting firm that I work for, and asked us if we would help them write a grant to the Bloomberg Philanthropies Public Art Challenge to apply for the grant that Bloomberg offers, or did offer that year, to use public art, temporary public art, to address a civic issue. So anybody that's being funded through this project is some sort of intersection, using art to address some kind of civic issue. And you had to be a city with 30,000 people and to be eligible to apply. And I think they had 200 applications, and they ended up funding 5. And our project did end up being one of the ones that they funded that year. The city, immediately in the aftermath of the shooting, everybody had to get out of the school. The school was a crime scene. And they had to go somewhere, and they went to the art museum, Coral Springs Museum of Art. I think their logo's up there somewhere, maybe. Yeah. And the museum immediately was using art therapy as a tool to help They ran weekly sessions for students and another one for educators. And people were coming to these for weeks, you know, just to process and to do art therapy activities with art therapists. And so the city said, we want this to become more of an ongoing program that everybody in the whole city can be part of, and maybe we can apply for this Public Art Challenge grant. And they did, and we helped them write the grant, identify the artists and the projects. And we identified 5. So this is it. I'll just show you some of these teams, some of these slides quickly. But this is the team, all the people that had to be part of making this happen. A lot of different people who work in the city, the fire department. You'll see why the fire department was involved. Students, lots of people. This is a presentation that I already had for something else, so I'm not going to use all the slides. But this is what they were doing as I was saying, what they were doing at the museum. And then we came in and helped them to apply for the Public Art Challenge, which specified that you had to do temporary public art. And we worked with the community to select, really we worked with the staff at the city and the staff at the museum to select these 5 artists who were going to do a series of 5 temporary projects. And the thing that all the projects had in common was that the community was involved in the creation of the project, like the physical creation of the project. So we were building on that from the art therapy model, using your hands to do things, to facilitate talking, which is kind of what Annie was talking about earlier about like a social object. You know, you're focusing on building something, but at the same time you're able to talk and the community could come together over these things. And so these are the 5 projects that ended up happening. The Temple of Time is down here on the bottom, and a scroll-a-thon, the Yellow Walk. Carl juiced a series of workshops, of photojournalism workshops for community members who wanted to be in this sort of class about how to use photojournalism. He was a Miami Herald photojournalist, and he taught this class for people to use photojournalism as a way to bear witness and for healing through their own lives. And then Peace and Love, which was this huge billboard-sized thing with the word Peace and Love spelled out with silk flowers attached, and the community participated in workshops to attach the silk flowers to the letters. In the scroll-a-thon, people made, I'm like a little challenged here because I don't know what my slides are, so I don't know what's coming. But just see if I can find the picture that I want to. I'll just talk to you about the Temple of Time, because honestly, that was the most impactful of the 5 projects. And I don't want to spend too much time because we have a lot of other presenters. But okay, so the Temple of Time, David Best, he's an artist who does this kind of thing in different places. He's done it in Northern Ireland and in different communities that are healing over something. And he actually started out working with people whose loved ones had committed suicide and been affected by drugs and things like that. And so he builds these temples, and then you light them on fire and watch them burn. And oh my God, like this was the most powerful thing that I've ever been involved in. I think I can say that without a doubt. So they built the temple, and I'm wondering if I have a picture of it. It's just built out of plywood. And you can see it in the background there on the far slide, but it's built out of plywood with all these very intricate things. And over the course of 2 weeks, all kinds of community groups came, like I think 2,000 people participated in building this temple. And then it was up for a few months. People came and they left mementos, and they could write all over the walls with markers. They could just spend time there. It was right across from City Hall. And then after it was up for a few months, we had the temple burn, which is what this picture was. And that's why we needed the firefighters involved, the fire department involved in the project, because they allowed this to happen it was the first time that one of these temples had been burned in an urban environment. So it was a little extra tricky, but I was there. I don't live in Florida, I live in New York, but I went down there for the build and for the burn. And I'm like having a very visceral memory of it, like the heat on my face, but also just being with 5,000, there were 5,000 people there experiencing this cathartic moment together. And it was really, really incredible. Like the idea is that what David says is that he can't heal anybody. His art can't heal anybody, but maybe he can take away a piece of their pain. So he talks about letting a piece of your pain go into the sky while the whole thing burns down. It was just a really, really meaningful experience for people, and kind of a wild thing for like a city to facilitate for its community. So there were 4 other projects, and they all unfolded over about a year, all around just creating these moments for people to come together and heal as a community, after the community was, affected by the shooting at the school. And so I think we have a lot of, I'll just leave it there because we have a lot of other interesting projects to talk about. And then, so should we each talk and then kind of have a conversation about the intersections among the intersections?
Cool.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Sure.
I also want to check because I know Elysian, who's
Yeah.
Zoom, wanted to.
Let's see if she's in the chat. At the beginning of Eliza's talk, she was not in the chat yet. Or not a participant yet, but let's see if she's here.
We don't want to follow that.
Fair, totally fair. Participants. We don't have Elysian in the participants. So would you care to share? Oh, she just where? Sorry, I saw Elise and I was like, no, I've seen Elysian. It's a different person. I'm sorry, Elise.
When I was reading about your program, you actually have a methodology. Very interesting to hear about.
Yes, you can go at the end. And I'm sorry that I thought you weren't here. Okay, all right. It's all you.
Hey team. So I actually, I assumed that I would talk about clinical arts, but I'm actually kind of curious because a few projects that I've worked on have kind of been intersections. So I was gonna take a vote if what people want to hear about.
What are the options?
Okay, ready? Hold on. I'll pull up clinical arts and I'll share. Beep boop beep. Clinical arts. It's a program at the RIS Museum that's been going for over 10 years, and there are actually many programs within the programs. So I could talk about that, or I could talk about Wikipedia editathons through art and feminism. I could talk about, Mark, we could talk about the lane. That would be way more interesting. Maybe too interesting. Let's see, what else? So, okay, three options. The clinical arts, the Wikipedia editathons, or I guess just 2 options. What do folks want to hear about? Raise your hand for clinical arts. Okay, cool. Okay, that's easier. Okay, so the clinical arts sessions at the RIS Museum, they have, there are a couple of them: Artful Medicine, Cops and Docs. Cops and Docs is a session in which usually detectives and practicing clinicians work together. And each of these programs has its own set of learning objectives, own sets of skills that they're trying to build. And the one that I have worked on the most would probably be working with internal medicine residents and also the dermatology folks. So, and through those programs, the medical students specifically get credit through the Warren Alpert Medical School at Brown. So it's a bona fide program. And the methodology that we use, and it varies per session, and I'm going to talk about the difficulties that my students face, but these might not be difficulties that other medical students face. It's just the ones that I've talked to my students. So, okay, so the methodology, we use visual thinking strategies. Raise your hand if you're familiar with visual thinking strategies. Okay, cool. A couple people haven't, so I'm gonna very briefly describe. It decontextualizes a piece of artwork, at least initially, where and it's a methodology. There's a whole great website about it. I'm not gonna do it. I'll send you later. In which facilitated discussions of an artwork build different skills like embracing ambiguity, which is really hard for doctors, by the way. Acknowledging other viewpoints outside of their own. Visual literacy skills. It also builds communication skills, deep listening skills. And if anyone wants to learn how to do it, I'm happy to teach anybody, just reach out. So there's VTS and then there's VTS Lite. And I'm curious from this group, the only museum that I'm familiar with that does proper VTS is the Isabella Stewart Gardner. Anybody know of any others that do proper VTS, like no wall labels, no historical context? Maybe the Barnes, maybe.
I was gonna say, I feel like the Barnes, they have labels, but it's on, they have sheets of them.
So they're optional. Okay, so what most folks do, and do other people call it VTS Lite, or is that something that we made up? Yeah, VTS Lite. Okay, cool. Thank you, team. So we do VTS Lite because one of the main objectives of most of these programs is addressing inherent biases and building metacognition skills. So we have to bring in the context so that we can then ask the students if that context changed their perception of the work and how and why. So not allowed to do, this stays here, not allowed to do proper VTS, only VTS Lite. And so any questions about the methodology? I can also show a lesson plan. VTS, so we have the deep looking discussion at the beginning of an artwork. And then we jump into the historical context, sprinkle it in lightly, gently, just a little bit at a time, and then follow up with those metacognition pieces. And then the key element that I haven't mentioned so far is that the residents teachers, they're medical doctors that facilitate these sessions with me, that can directly connect the experience that we're having to their clinical practices. But full disclosure, they haven't been showing up lately. So I've played doctor and pretended to understand what it means to be a doctor, and what clinical practices look like. So I will say that a lot of these programs were deeply hit by the pandemic for obvious reasons. The doctors were busy. They couldn't come to the museum. So in the wake of quarantine being lifted, these programs are just kind of starting to come back alive. And so I can talk about the problems, the structural problems in the program. I can talk about the students' problems, because I'm still kind of stuck in the failure session. Or I can talk more in-depthly about BTS, or what are you all curious about? What do you want to know? Julia, because
about what enabled the cross-section, what the key component was that enabled the partnership to happen.
Sector.
What a glorious question. So Julia just asked what enabled the partnership, the cross field interdisciplinary collaboration in the program. And that is 100%, it's faculty led. So one of the major key players in the program is Dr. Jay Baruch, who you're very familiar with, Julia. Julia, can I just talk about Julia for a second? So Julia, she started lots of things at Brown, but also the first project that I worked on to fill in for you during your maternity leave was the Medical Humanities edX course, which featured, it was a completely virtual course that featured facilitators from the RISD Museum as well as clinicians. Oh, do you want to talk about it? No? Okay. So, okay. But this one emergency room physician just has this real penchant and passion for medical humanities, and he's the one that's been making so many connections lately. Yeah, ER doctors got real busy for a while. There were two other hands. Yes, Jasmine.
I actually work at a medical campus.
Ooh.
And we did a similar program with first-year medical students where we bring art to the medical school to do this at the medical school because, as you said, it's really hard to get docs to come to like a secondary location. I wonder, do you have to bring the art to like the medical school lectures?
So I should have handed you the mic, I'm sorry. But Jasmine just mentioned that she works on a medical campus where they bring the artwork physically to the doctors. And we do not do that. They have a Lyft account where they ferry the doctors from their classes at the medical school over to the museum. It's very fancy. One of my stipulations is that they get fed at some point during the session because one of my worst fears is teaching hungry people. So, let's see. So, but that sounds like a lot of infrastructure to move artworks to the doctors.
Well, they're reproductions, or we like just put them on like a projector, and that captures like the most amount of students.
So for Zoom folks, Jasmine was mentioning that oftentimes it's reproduction or Zoom, and especially with particularly like narrative pieces, you can replicate a lot of the conversations that would happen in person. And I appreciate that question because one of the main challenges of the program is that the students are exhausted all the time. And I had 2 weeks ago, I had this huge lesson plan that I was super proud of and was about to teach, and only 3 students showed up. And then those 3 were so exhausted that I threw out the lesson plan and said, which artworks do you want to go talk about? And had them choose the artworks that they wanted. They went medieval. They really wanted to hear about the medieval stuff. Yeah, and the other big challenge I will say is that oftentimes a lot of the they don't get time to slow down. They're super tired. They feel completely out of their element, and they are so used to data and science and exactitude, and so asking them to embrace ambiguity is another like space that they're not familiar with. They're also very competitive. They are sassy with each other. So trying to develop a rapport and a facilitated conversation with folks who are competitive with each other can get sassy. The other challenge, they, oh, there was another hand. Yeah, Emma. No.
So what you were saying, this is all super fascinating. Many moons ago, I worked in the hospital, actually, although not like in the arts context. It's a long story. Happy to chat about it later. But I'm curious if you can share if there's like an anecdote that speaks to some of these things you're discussing, like the struggles with ambiguity and or even maybe things that have surprised you about what these students are sharing. Like if there's one experience or tidbit that is coming to mind from your experience working with these folks that you can just share with us.
It's like
about a specific artwork, if you can describe it.
Yeah, it's like I've planted these questions because they're so good. So the Emma was just asking for a specific anecdote, like a direct example of addressing ambiguity or teaching how to embrace ambiguity with a specific artwork. So here's a fun thing, and I'm curious if other people have experienced this as well, is when you put doctors, especially in front of a portrait, they try to diagnose that person. They're like, oh, jaundiced. Like they're very concerned about the welfare of the subjects in the artwork. And they are so used to having exact answers and having them told to them. So one of the best parts about VTS is that it builds autonomy in the audience, the museum visitors, that they can feel empowered in their own opinions and therefore get invested in the artworks or feel comfortable in the space. And so when they don't know what's going on or the historical context, they feel really unmoored. And so one of the other challenges, oh crap, I just had it, that you connected to okay, so we talked about the structural challenges, the exhaustion, the hunger, fatigue, the other huge crazy challenge is that they oftentimes will understandably kind of go into a therapy session and use the time where they are projecting their own internal struggles and challenges into the artwork, or are looking for emotional support. And so one of the things that's really struck me is that these doctors are not getting any emotional support, and they're coming straight from their rounds and they're processing the microaggressions that they just felt, and but from patients or other doctors. And I think, was it 2015 that Brown did a survey of the medical community and found the highest number of incidences were happening in the medical school? What, Caroline?
Sorry, incidences of what?
Oh, sorry, incidences of discrimination or bad stuff. Sorry, I haven't looked at that in a while. But I know that other folks have medical humanities experiences, and I feel like I'm over time. Anyone else?
Can I ask a question? I'm interested in folks' ideas on social prescribing. I know my organization is working towards policy development in terms of so we're looking for case making, data on the impact of clinical arts, I guess, and trying to pitch to public health, for instance, possible policy development. So wondering who knows about there's Tasha Golden, but folks in California or the field in general, or is there policy development with social prescribing nationwide? Just interested in kind of
Social prescribing, meaning what? Prescribing social interaction?
Visiting museums to for healing through public health.
Hello. Well, most of the stuff I think that's going on in terms of like research and case studies about social prescribing is happening in the UK right now. But I will say there are several like NEA funded research labs around like the US who are looking into like the effects of art on various things. And specifically the institution I work at has one of these labs. It's called CORAL, which is the Colorado Resilience Arts Lab. And they're studying the effect of art making, group art making on healthcare worker burnout. And they just published a couple studies with really kind of incredible long-term results on those effects. So just wanted to shout out Colorado, and there's other labs around too, but that's just the one I'm most familiar with. Yeah, I work at Children's Hospital Colorado, and that's a part of the Anschutz Medical Campus at University of Colorado campus.
I don't have a specific example in the US, but the other thing I just note, and maybe you already saw this, is that the Surgeon General just released a statement about loneliness. And it includes an entire report that has like 6 recommendations. One of the key ones is social infrastructure. And so if you're able to position museums as an important piece of social infrastructure, that could really tie into an important federal message right now.
Oh, okay. Oh, you should go. You should go. Okay. Just another quick note, Harvard is opening up a program this fall on through their continuing education that's very similar to these clinical arts programs. And I don't know if they're hiring facilitators, but that if folks are looking for jobs, that's a good place to look.
I was just going to say Mass Cultural Council has a social prescribing. They'll reimburse. So I think that's a really good state council model, which might work for you. And then University of Florida, I think that's where some of the more interesting arts and medicine stuff is happening. And I know they have good research studies. And they have a partnership with UCL in London. And that is also a great repository. They just did a great research study that looked at all the policy frameworks. They tried to look internationally, but it's kind of interesting. So interesting stuff.
Also shout out John Hopkins, Arts and Mind Lab.
Yeah. Elise looks so. Oh, I realized I can't talk to the computer.
Oh. There's a bunch of other like social prescribing. So I feel like we could get a email chain. I feel like we could get an email chain for folks who want to share out resources for social prescribing and other arts and medicine things.
Let's do it. Everybody's email is in the emails that I've been sending. So if you want to curate a specific list, I can also send up a follow-up email after we're done here being like, here's the spreadsheet with all the people who said they wanted to come. I don't know if they're all here, but remember who you remember. Elise, are you ready?
Yes. Sorry, I'm home in Denver. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
This is so strange. I'm gonna put on my video. I don't know if everyone can see me. Okay, so I'm home and I have a 4.5-year-old running around. So this may be weird and strange, but hi everyone. I'm so glad Jasmine's in the room because part of what I wanted to share. So this is super informal. I don't have slides, but arts and health, like I squealed with delight when I saw that it was going to be chatted about because that is my jam. It is what I am passionate about. So I graduated from the Public Humanities program in 2012, and I went in with a visual arts focus, wanted to be in art museums. My dad is an art therapist, so creative expression has always been in my blood. I worked in public art in museums after graduating from the program. But then my son was born. Oh, hi, there I am. leaning into the computer. I'm in Denver, so I'm wearing a flannel. It's still a chilly. I'm waiting for my 4.5-year-old to pop up. So I was just in the caretaker session. My son is medically complex. He was born with a rare genetic syndrome called Treacher-Collins syndrome. If you guys have seen the movie Wonder or read the book, that is what Augie has, and that is what my son has. And so what is crazy and weird is that the day I went into labor, I was writing an article for my company about the importance of arts and health and how hospital art programs are making arts more accessible to their audiences. And so I was just like nodding away in Liz's presentation about arts and health because, that is the stuff that I am working on. So part of my work at Artwork Archive, we're an online art inventory management system. We work with individual artists, so artists who are working in the hospital setting within arts and health. Collectors, those guys paying money for the programs within arts and health, and the funders, and then the organizations, so those with collections, so public art, hospitals, academic institutions, museums. And the Jasmine Connection, I am on the art selection committee for Children's Hospital Colorado, which is the awesome program that Jasmine is running, because that is where my son is a frequent flyer. And I'm also on the National Organization of Arts and Health. So one of the reasons why I wanted to just get up here and chat is to direct you guys to that awesome resource. We had a conference in Baltimore in November, and there were a lot of sessions about social prescribing. And there's also just a lot of great work that's not necessarily connected to the visual arts, drum circles for patients with Parkinson's. There's mural making for neurodivergent kids. There's just a lot of, sorry, there goes my toddler. 1 second, Odin. Mommy's presenting to a big room in Providence. And so if we have these convenings, these creative forums that happen almost monthly about topics, bringing art educators and artists together, bringing musicians, performers together to talk about their work. So I wanted to direct you guys to that. But also, I just want to shout out the work that Jasmine is doing within Children's Hospital Colorado. I get to also see it because they use the art database that I use at my company. My company's art database. Sorry, now my dog wants to get included in this conversation. And Jasmine has done an incredible job with DEI and H initiatives with diversity and inclusion at the hospital, and taking a moment to say, as someone who was living in the hospital for multiple months, the hospital is a really unique opportunity to bring art to those that don't actively seek it out. And I come from the lens of working within public art and making art more accessible to people who may not feel comfortable or welcome going into an art museum. They don't know the social norms or what is expected of them. They may not have the resources to go. They may not be available when the museum is open, right? And what I think is really interesting about art in hospitals is that you have an audience that may not be art enthusiasts, may not feel welcomed into our local art institutions, and it's an opportunity to introduce them to the creative process and to introduce them into an art into a way for them to consume it at their will, whether it is to entertain them, distract them, whatever it may be. And so back to Jasmine, she led the hospital and the hospital's first Pride Month exhibition last June, which was wonderful. We've had, hi, oh, here's my son. Here, Buddy, come say hi. Woo!
To the camera. The camera's behind us.
Oh, the camera's behind us.
But a few more things about Jasmine. And then she's done an incredible job making our exhibits more accessible. We have labels in a hospital that are both in English and Spanish, because English is not necessarily the first language for a lot of the patients that are at the hospital. And she's really on making sure that the artists represented in our collection are diverse and representative of the communities in Denver. And so I just really wanted to say thank you to Jasmine because she's doing some incredible public humanities work here in Colorado for a community that is very much in need and appreciative of the creative process. So yeah, that was just me. Sorry, that was all over the place. Children, Denver, weekend home. But that's me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Any questions for Elise? I can pass around the mic. Or things that they want to talk to Elise about or include in the conversation about other things.
Oh, yes, please do. Oh, me either. Let's see. We're gonna share screen again. 1 second. Yeah, there we go.
Elise, I hope it's okay. I figured before we hit the 3 o'clock mark.
Yes, please do. I'm so sorry.
We would, no, that's okay. I'm gonna go quickly because, where's the play? How do I hit the?
Oh, it should be.
I can't like see it.
Over time, I mean, 15 years.
Okay. I'm gonna go quickly. Mine is like just the polar opposite of all the other presentations that we've had today. My name is Betsy. I graduated in 2008. And my background's in tourism and tourism marketing and tourism programming. And then the pandemic hit and I had 3 kids and I've been volunteering for the last 3 years and not working for pay. So I'm gonna do a little brief presentation that sort of crosses public programming with nature education and health and kids. So quick summary, I'm on the board of a nonprofit in Somerville, Mass, where I live, called the Somerville Community Growing Center. It is a different kind of community garden that is owned by, the space is owned by the city. It's only a 1/4 acre in size, but it's run by a nonprofit friends group, kind of like the Friends of the Public Garden, although a lot smaller. And our, as you can see, our budget is only $50K. We're almost all volunteer led. We have 2 very, very, very part-time contracted employees. And we run a lot of programs every year. We actually have a permit from the city in order to do that. And a lot of the focus is on children and nature and the important health benefits of that. I feel like this is like, we're ending on this like very quirky, weird, whimsical note that maybe that's a good thing that can spark other conversations. But I feel like I'm following like some serious stuff and this is like, so, but the Growing Center is, it's almost all volunteer run and we have tons of programs every single year. In 2022, we had 86 different free programs across the basically March to October time period. So we'll get into that. I have not historically been involved in a lot of the programming that we do. I do a lot of the promotion, the website, blog writing, and stuff like that. But a bunch of years ago, the Somerville Public Library had a stuffed animal sleepover to just promote, you know, the library and get people thinking about the library in different ways and how it's not just a place that you get books. And the Boston Globe covered it. And that's my son on the bottom when he was 4, getting to bring his dog for the sleepover at the library. So I've been thinking about this for a while, especially with COVID, and trying to think about how we can do more programming that's like bringing different kids into the space. And I will say that we do have a program manager who manages the whole site, and she also oversees what we call the Children in Nature Initiative. So basically, she works with a lot of preschool groups in the area, the Head Start, the YMCA preschool, and brings in kids, many of whom don't have yards, many of whom live in projects, to be able to just have a place to play in nature. There's no plastic in the growing center. There's a wood chipped area with a sand pile, sand sticks, pieces of wood, empty plant pots. That might be the only plastic if those are made of plastic. Baskets, trowels, various containers to play with, and pine cones and stuff like that. And then we have this long-running program called the Gathering of Fairies, which I'll talk about in a second. So I was thinking about this as I decided I wanted to do some kind of programming in the summer, especially in August when a lot of people go away. Like, what about the people who are still there? And what can we do? So I was inspired by the Gathering of Fairies, which has been going on for over 20 years at the Growing Center. And all it is a couple of moms decided 20-something years ago, let's have an event that's just very magical and wonderful, and basically invites kids in to dress up as their favorite imaginary creature, and we'll have story reading and wand making and fun stuff like that. And it's become a wonderful community event. People look forward to it every year, and it actually is a big fundraiser for us, which is to say that we make like $300 to $400 at the event, just putting a donation jar out and putting a Venmo sign out. So I was sort of thinking about that as I thought about what we could do as a really inexpensive way to bring people into the space. And so the idea of the stuffed animal sleepover became the stuffed animal camp out, because the kids are going to bring their own stuffed animals, and we use like pillowcases and pieces of cardboard to make the tents. And ultimately the end result was this sort of online, it was an online happening, but that was after the fact. Kids actually did get to come into the space, make pretend s'mores, sing camp songs, listen to stories, and kind of get to experience what camping is like, especially kids who don't go camping regularly. And they kind of got to experience the idea of camping and being in nature vicariously through their stuffed animals, because the kids did not stay over. We did get that question a lot. People were like, well, who's going to be there overnight? And I was like, they're stuffed animals. But that gave me the idea of taking Dimitri the goat here, which was a gift from my mom's good friend to my son when he was born. So he became the camp counselor. So we made sure over social media that everyone knew that he was in charge, so that they didn't have to worry. And it just became this really great happening. And again, we got a lot of great, we got more likes. We got a lot of people really engaged with the space from this program, which is exactly what the library got as well. And we did go to the library and say, hey, is it okay if we, if we steal your idea? And they said, of course. And they still do their own sleepover as well. And we also worked with a local Girl Scout troop, and they came in and they were really excited. So they got to like pose the animals in different ways, and we took pictures. We have a really funny picture here of a Girl Scout giving all the camp rules out to the animals. So that was a lot of fun to put together with them. And we fed the Girl Scouts pizza. And then because we are a very, very tiny nonprofit, we wanted to make sure that we did sort of start the process of, for people who can give to us, it really does help be able to do more programming like this for kids in nature. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about things that my cohort, my colleague, our Children in Nature coordinator, has talked to me about in terms of why we do this, why we have this program called the Children in Nature Initiative at the Growing Center. Kids who play outside in all weather develop resilience, they experience important sensory experiences, they gain knowledge about seasonal changes, and through physical experiences, they strengthen their bodies and develop self-regulation. These kids are often more positive, creative, and adaptable. As one teacher observed, challenging weather can sometimes create real and perceived risks and real opportunities for growth. Outdoor play experiences also engage children in learning more about their environment through learning that is connected to the real world. Concepts like how water moves, plant, butterfly, bird, insect, and animal life cycles. They see firsthand how flowers turn into seeds and experience weather and seasonal changes. So there is a lot of good that can come out of simply bringing a kid into nature and kind of letting them run free. And that is something that we really embrace at the Growing Center, because we are sort of what we call like a wild space. We're sort of unmanicured in that sense. And so when the kids come from Head Start and the Y and some of these other places, sometimes there is some programming that we do with them, and sometimes it's just run wild and be a kid in nature. So I'll leave you with a quote that my colleague shared with me from Rachel Carson. I will not say that I did not actually read this from a Rachel Carson book, so I apologize that I coached this from a blog post. If a child is to keep alive his inborn sense of wonder, he needs the companionship of at least one adult who can share it, rediscovering with him the joy, excitement, and mystery of the world we live in. So I'm going to leave it at that, because we're at the time and people might have questions for anyone, right?
Sure. Or does somebody? I saw him like leaning forward. Does anyone want the mic? Does anyone on Zoom want to say things? We can hear you.
Ooh, if anyone wants a little bedside table reading, Betsy, that was awesome. And it reminded me, my great grandmother wrote a book called The Ecology of Imagination. And it was like back in the early 20th century, like in the early 1900s. And she was like one of the first people to talk about the importance of kids being outside and being playful, and not being just squatted at desks stuck. If anyone wants some extra reading.
Should we all take an emotional break for a couple minutes before the next panel on mentorship? Okay. Yeah. Let's go cry in bathrooms and lay down. Yeah, what's your deal?
Everybody, so here's the deal. We are combining the making of piñatas and talking about the cycle of life, the circle of life at the same time. It seems very appropriate. So what I think the way we'll set this up is that we will start with some instructions, hand out material. People can work on site up there.
Yes.
And I will talk and we'll work together, and you will make things to be destroyed while I talk about things being destroyed.
All right, so if you would like to make a piñata, come on over and I will give you 3 pieces of paper.
I'm just going to spread out paper.
Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you. I trust you all to, yeah. If you are interested in making a piñata, I will give you 3 pieces of cardstock. The basic structure is to do, where you do hot dog or hamburger folding. You're not going to fold, but you're going to do hot or hamburger into a tube. And then that's going to be your body, and you're going to fold in the tops. Like do you ever like make a dog treat for your dog with like a toilet paper tube, and then you fold the top so that they can't get in, and then it's the light thing?
Do one.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little abstract. Some of us.
Yeah. That's true. I was thinking of this being a whole thing that is, I don't know how I can share this is the problem. So I'm happy to lead a thing, and I'm happy for you to lead a thing, but I don't know that I know how to do it together because it takes a second.
I'll talk for 10 minutes and you do your thing.
You don't get to talk for 10 minutes.
But, okay, I'll start and.
Yes, and wine and cheese can be making piñatas if you like.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. It is wonderful to make stuff while you talk and listen to people at the same time. It's really simple. So is this? Hello. So if I want to be louder, okay. What's that?
Have like these mics are.
Do they make it louder?
Yes.
Let me do that.
But just make sure you have this one too.
Okay. Okay. All right, everybody. I'm losing my voice as I tend to do, so I'm going to use the microphone. First of all, thank you, all of you, for coming and coming back to visit. It's just wonderful to see everybody. I've tried to tell that to almost everybody. I will keep telling everyone. It is so good to see you. It's wonderful to have sort of an event that brings things back, I won't say full circle, but brings people back to where we began. So that's really nice. So Rika gave me this title, The Circle of Life, which is sort of too big and profound for the way I like to think about things. But when we first started talking about this session, I started referring to it as Awake. Awake is about remembering, about celebrating the life of the deceased, and that's half of it. But even more important for the Wake is it's about the friends of the deceased getting together and reinforcing their community, rebuilding their community, being together again. And so that's what we've tried to do as we've set this up. So in a very institutional, unsocial kind of way, as maybe isn't a surprise. So we collected memories for the memory book, and published that, and I am absolutely thrilled for Kate and Bryn to have done that work. And for all of you who sent in comments and memories and pictures. That's the part of it that is about remembering and celebrating the life. Julia and Stephanie did a wonderful job of celebrating the life of the center in Providence, in Rhode Island, and talking about all of the things that happened, all of the important work that was done, and setting it up to think about how that work might continue, who can do that kind of work. So that's the celebrating the life of the program part of it. Rika and Jasmine, who are really good at thinking about this kind of thing, pushed it towards the getting together part. How do we reinforce who we are and remind ourselves about why we like to be together? They also gave the session a new title. It wasn't Awake anymore, but a Destruction and Regeneration, which is harsher, maybe, and more blunt. And Jasmine and Rika are good at that. But maybe it's also more hopeful, the regeneration part. Wake is about, saying goodbye, and regeneration is about rebirth and moving on. And that seems like a really good place to go, especially at the end of the day. It's about regeneration, it's about rebirth. Change hurts, but change is how you grow. That seems like the thing to take from that title. So I've been thinking lately a lot about endings and beginnings, because as some of you know, I'm about to go into half-time retirement, which means that I will be ending a lot of the sort of work that professors tend to do. I'll teach one course a year, then I'll get to teach anything I want, which is exciting. And that's, Brown is eager to encourage old faculty to quit. And that's a really good thing, because that's all part of that destruction and regeneration. You need to clear the way so that new people who will come in and do more and better and different work, that seems important. So like I said, it's that moment about thinking about how things end and what it is I'm beginning is really something I've been thinking about a lot. As all of you know, the Public Humanities program has been a big part of my life for 20 years, almost exactly 20 years since this. I've been around for 19 years, but give it a year for thinking about it and coming here. It's shaped who I am in many ways. I think it's fair to say that I reinvented myself for the position. I was not a public humanist as we would define it now before I came here. And I have learned from so many of you about what that means. And I want to call out Annie in particular. Annie has really, more than anybody else, taught me what it means to be a public human. And she was my best teacher in this, and I'm sort of absolutely thrilled that she's back. And so it's also, and I think this is a public humanities thing, it's about learning from other people, learning from the people you work with, and learning from all of the students has been, in some ways, the best part of the program. The balance, and this is back to this destruction and regeneration, the balance between holding some sort of vision and at the same time being open to change, I think is essential to this kind of work, and also, again, a difficult sort of thing to do. It's very easy to say, nope, we're just going to be exactly the same as we were. It's sort of easy to say, sure, anything goes. That sounds great, go do it. Where to draw that line and how to balance those two is something that, I don't know I've ever gotten good at it, but I maybe gotten a little bit better at it, trying to keep those two in my head at the same time. That's the lesson about change that we all need to work on. How to have a vision, but also, well, in public humanities term, think about your audience. So that's and your community. You're not telling people what to do, you're working with them, figuring that out. So that balance seems like maybe something that we all need to keep learning. So, like I say, I've been thinking about this in personal terms, but what we're really here to talk about is the center and the program, the public humanities program, and its death and reinvention. It's death and regeneration, or destruction and regeneration. Is there a similar story there that we can think about what to hold on to, what can change, about what drops, what you don't do anymore, what you do keep doing? And here's where I have to say that at a really theoretical level, there's something very appealing to me about programs stopping after 20 years and starting in some new way. It's a very easy thing to say for other people's programs. It's really easy to say, you know, it's good. Everything should start over again. Forget all that things you've done, and new people will come in and you did a great job, but other people will do it differently and they'll do a good job too. Programs get set in their ways. It's hard to change things. Again, just like in personal life, it's hard to change things. But the world has changed. The world now is so different from the world of 20 years ago. The university has changed. What we think about communities, so much of, I taught the methods in public humanities class probably the last time for this semester. And I ended up telling the students, I am so much less certain about what I'm teaching now than I was 20 years ago. We had the discussion about community, which you've probably all heard. And I said, I really don't understand it anymore. I thought at one point I had figured this out. It has changed. It's way more interesting now than it was 20 years ago, but it's way more difficult. And I think I said, I'm not the one to tell you what this means anymore. You have to figure this out. It's new and different. So the world has changed. Organizations should change, but it is hard for organizations to change. So that's at a sort of theoretical level, they should change. At an emotional level, like I say, it is not so easy to give up. The end of something that did good work and continues to do good work, it's hard. It's not something we want to do. and I have to just say a little bit of complaining here. Brown did not do a good job of ending the program. Like I say, I appreciate the idea of change. Brown is eager to become more of a research university than it is. It is very eager to be an academically research-driven place. And again, in a theoretical sort of, theoretical way, I understand why that is. It is what universities do when they want to grow and become bigger and be better. I think it's bad. It's not what the world needs. Brown was something different and sort of wonderful in its own way. But I completely understand why they're doing that. So again, this theoretical thing versus what I think would be nice. So the change makes me unhappy. And so change is hard when it's a change for the worse. And the center is, or what I think of as being worse than what it was. But I can see why Brown is doing it. So I wish it had been different. I wish that Brown had been, well, wasn't going that direction. And if it had decided to go in that direction, that it had been more thoughtful about the way it dealt with the center. So for all of you who have been involved with that, I apologize. Brown could have done much better in talking about things. But, and this is the good news part of things, this is the regeneration part, things may turn out okay, and maybe even better than okay. So I'll give you a little bit of an update that I've mentioned to some of you. The Ruth Simmons Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, folks there, including our alum, Shayna, who is here someplace on the screen, have been working on a plan for a new public humanities program. They have taken this very, very seriously. I think Shayna said they've interviewed 25 different people. They've talked to many groups, including a group of alumni a couple of months ago. And I'm told that they've submitted that plan and it will be considered by the Graduate Council next week. So there is a plan put forward, not yet approved, but knowing the folks at CSSJ, I'm sure it's a very good plan. We will probably have some news within a week or two about a new program. And this might be the bright side of that thinking about change. It's funny, both Annie and I are the two folks we quoted are Nina, we both are quoting Nina Simon on this kind of thing. So Nina Simon, as I'm sure you all remember from the readings that you've done, she talks about what cultural organizations need are what she calls insider outsiders. These are the people who are not part of the organization, but are enough connected to understand what's going on. So they bring their own interests, they do their own thing, they're outsiders, but they're insiders in that they understand things. And in some ways, you could not ask for a better group of insider-outsiders than CSSJ and the Ruth Simmons Center to reinvent a program like this. They have distance, they can see what's been good and what's been bad, but they have their own ideas too. They're coming at this from a different direction. They can look at us and say, we want to keep those things, we don't want to keep those things, here's what's useful for a new world, a world 20 years after we started. I made the very clear decision early on that I didn't want to be involved with that reinvention, that recreation. That was for other people, for people who are going to be here, for people who didn't have the baggage of the program. I encouraged them, I said, talk to everybody. Anything that can be useful, let me know. But reinvention means new people, new things happening. And like I say, in the theoretical sense, I completely get that. In a very emotional sense, it's harder. I think that's true for all of us. So maybe the lesson of all of this is knowing when to let go is part of this allowing for reinvention and recreation. It goes back to those cycles, the circle of life, the cycles of letting things die, letting them be born. Allowing change is the difficult things. At lunch, Annie spoke about sustainability, something about doing your best to set things up so that good change can happen. And that's what I hope we've done. We have set wonderful examples. All of you doing the work you do has shown the power and the importance of what the title of the book is, the public humanities idea. And we have set a style that is really, I think, pretty wonderful. And we've established a basis on which new things can be built. So they're being built at Brown, I hope, but the most important part, and this is where I'll end, the most important part is that they're being built by all the things you folks do all the time. So I want to just say, keep that up. That's the bright side of all of this work. Thank you. And now, time for piñata building. Oh boy, I've never had that. Does anyone on Zoom want to say anything?
No? Okay.
No.
I just want
I don't think so.
do folks on Zoom wanna do some things? Okay, all right,
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't have the chat up here.
Oh, God, just look directly into that light.
I don't see, oh, there's somebody in chat. Thank you. Oh, Bess says, hi, Bess. Oh.
On Zoom, if you want to continue with us and make piñatas, it's all very easy. And if you have paper by you, you got this, and tape. And glue might also be helpful, but mostly just the tape and the paper. So we have all the materials over here. If we can all grab 3 pieces of cardstock and like a handful of this tissue paper, and then we can and a pen, and then we can start. Thanks for the platform, Steve. Hey.
That was a really, really good talk. I like how much it was,
Steve, you have
wait, whereas you said wait,
Okay. If you are interested in continuing your piñata and you have your materials, on one of the pages, I think you should write some reflections from your day. Something that you're thinking about. It could be a drawing. You could just be thinked out for the day, or maybe you're feeling emotional. World is your oyster. We are bringing in tables for easier crafting, and also safer gluing once we get to a gluing stage. So FYI, it's happening. If anyone has finished their reflections and is ready to move on to another step, you can grab a piece of painter's tape, fold into a tube. You got it. Yeah. Yeah. And then with your other 2 pieces of paper, you're gonna fold it into corkers. Painter's tape is floating around the room. Aha, like across. Yes. I will do it also, so we are together. The interesting thing about piñatas, I'm just gonna talk. If you listen, that's cool, and if you don't listen, that's also cool. The interesting thing about piñatas is that usually they are very labor intensive and very beautiful and very cute. You don't often see, like during COVID and during the like Trump era, there were like Trump and COVID piñatas, but that's like very outside the norm. Usually it's like a little pony or like a child or something very cute, like a superhero. I always found that interesting because then the whole point of it is to just beat the shit out of it. But it's very different from like an effigy, which tends to be something that is representing like an evil or something you want to do away with. But it serves the same purpose as this kind of thing you have to destroy in order to initiate a new phase of something. So regardless of whether you use your piñata as a piñata or an effigy, if it turns out ugly, it can be an effigy. If it turns out pretty, it can be a piñata. It can just be a statue if you need it to be. I have been told that we are not allowed to burn anything on the premises. So if you are interested in effigying, we have to do it elsewhere. But if you are interested in piñataing, we can do it from the tree out in front.
So what happens after the taping?
So we got the tube. The next part is you fold in the top. So you're gonna kind of create, I'm gonna put this down. we're gonna tube. We're gonna tube like this. We're gonna tape down the side here with the imaginary tape that I imagine that I have. And then we're gonna fold down this way so that it closes. Can I borrow somebody's tape and then I can show you? Thank you. Sorry. And if anyone has tape, if anyone needs tape, it can always be passed. Get a lot for later. All right. Tape it. Usually, oh wow, this is a close-up of me untangling my mask from my earrings. If you start at the seam and press in, it will kind of get to a flat point, and then you can go to the next point and press in, and it'll start to cover your opening. You get to another point and you press in, and it continues to cover your opening. And then by the time you get around to maybe 3 or 4, you should have kind of a covered space. It's not going to be super structurally stable, but you don't really want a piñata to be terribly structurally stable, or else it's going to be really difficult to destroy. So you can take your hand and put it inside and press it so that it kind of becomes more of a... Does that make sense? There, you got it? You got it? And then we're going to do it to the other side. So we're just going to press it in, find a point, and press it in. You can tape it, yeah. Like I said, it's a varying structural stability. The less structurally stable, not always the better, because you don't want it to fall apart in a tree, but you also don't want to work too hard to get candy. We can. Yeah. If you need to, or if you would like to, like mine is kind of a little open, I'm just gonna throw some tape on it. All right, so this is gonna be our body. Does everyone feel okay with our body? Okay, all right. Next, we're gonna get to our head and our legs and our neck. So, we have 2 pieces of paper, we're gonna fold them in quarters. If you have scissors by you, you can cut. If you don't have scissors by you, you can rip down the seam. If it helps, you can fold them back the other way and lick it. That always makes it easier to tear. And if you don't want to lick a piece of paper, that's also fine. There are scissors. Yes, I'll do it again. Yes, I will talk into the mic. All right. So the next part, once you're done with the body, is the legs and the neck. And my mask. Okay. The legs and the neck. You're going to fold into quarters your other 2 pieces of paper. Can we? Could I also have a thing so you don't have to hold it for me? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Perfect. In case this wasn't obvious, this was not the plan. So I'm sorry in advance that this is a little chaotic, but that is true to my personal brand. So here we are. So we're going with quarters. Make sure you either have scissors by you or you fold one way and then fold the other way so that your seams are nice and easy to tear. Also increasing the easiness of tearing is licking your paper. I know that's gross, so feel free to do or not do, but it is great. And then you're gonna tear down your seams or cut if you have scissors handy. We can also pass the scissors around. And we'll have 8 little pieces. So with 4 of these little pieces, we're gonna make some legs. We're gonna do the exact same thing we did with the big piece of paper, but tiny. We're gonna fold it into a little tube. We're gonna tape it all the way down, and then we're gonna fold so it's contained. Sometimes it gets easier to fold them the smaller they get, folding in the top. If you're a person with a dog or cat, this is a great enrichment activity to put a treat in a tube. Leg number 1. You're welcome to make as many legs as you like for the kind of creature that you would like to make. This is basically like a dog or a little burro or something. But you could make a tiny person. You could make a lizard. The options are endless. Wow. What's happening over there? That's beautiful. Will you show everyone your bird? Whoa. Yeah, of course, if you are independently creative and know how things work, feel free to make the shapes of your choice. This is just a basic. If anyone is done with legs and would like to start on a head. Oh. Nope, okay, we'll wait. I see some folks are gluing legs onto the bodies. That's great. If you're not gluing legs onto the body, or no, glove, taping legs onto the bodies. If you're not doing that, you're welcome to do that. Or not. if you are getting to the point where you would like to make a head, instead of rolling into a even tube, we're gonna roll into kind of a pointy tube. A quarter. You're gonna roll it into kind of a pointy tube. You're gonna secure it where you would like it to be. And then these parts can become little ears. Yeah. And then you can also fold the nose in, so it's contained.
I'm really not a scratcher at home,
He really reminds me of
If anyone is at a point where they want to make a tail, they can take one of their quarters and do a little roll. So take a corner and tuck it in, and then just do a little roll. Like you're trying to make a fake cigarette, like a child's trying to be cool. And slowly it'll become a tiny little tail. When it is the size of a tail you want, you can rip it off or cut it if you like. Fold it into little things. Tape it onto your body. It doesn't have to be proportional. In case anyone's curious where this is going, this is our little sample. We're all gonna make this. It's all gonna look like this once we're done. So if you are interested in continuing on to the section where we're gluing things, taping also works. Taping is great. Your taping looks amazing. Come show your guy.
I wasn't gonna follow directions, I taped
You were intuiting the directions and it looks so beautiful.
It's gonna be a porcupine.
Oh, he's so cute. Okay, so you're gonna grab one of these little perforated pieces of paper and so I've seen several people tearing them in half so they have the more confetti-like ends. That's also cool. You can glue the solid end with your confetti end, or you can glue this end to this end and then layer them with the rounded confetti bottom, if that makes sense. It adds a little bit more volume. Yeah, there you go, Steve. That's it. And perhaps tape is the better move. But if you are a glue person, please glue at a table. some fun facts about piñatas if you'd like them is that they're a pagan Mesoamerican thing for birthday celebrations, and they used to be clay pots. And they would shatter a beautiful clay pot full of like little treats. And then the Spanish came around and they were like, that's fucked up. You need to do things the Catholic way. We're gonna shatter a big paper sculpture that is the 7-pointed star for the 7 deadly sins. We're gonna murder the 7 deadly sins. And everyone in Mesoamerica was like, maybe, like, we'll do it out of paper, but also we're gonna do it as like little children, like when they have their birthday, someone will make a piñata of them, and it's like, haha, like, and I'm gonna smash my younger self, or like a cute dog, or yeah. So there's some definite like sacrificial history there, but then there's also an attempt to make it like we wanna brutalize things that are bad, but not everyone does that, and that's okay. Nice, nice. In case it makes it easier for anyone, wrapping a leg can start at the bottom and you can hold it and wrap it in a circle. And by the time you get around, it'll hold itself and you can wrap it in a circle again, just a little higher. And then you can wrap it in a circle again, just a little higher. And now you have a whole leg covered and it's just one thing and it's easy and it looks cute. You can secure it with tape or glue. If you are interested in making ears for your piñata or a tail, you can always take a little chunk, tear it off, roll it into a little flower, and affix it to an ear. Yeah, right? It's cute. You can also affix it to a butt as a tail. If you have a darker color, you can affix it on top of an eye for an eyelash. You could give it a little collar of flowers. For those of you on Zoom, do you have any questions?
All right, I guess I could ask into this mic. Is that better? Would you like to start maybe at the feet? Starting bottom up tends to help. Alright, so I will hold it. How about you start a 6, do you have a shape glue gun or some kind of sticky? So let's take a little bit of sticky. Put it on the end. Yeah. And then we're going to stick it right there. Yeah, right? And like, it goes really fast. It seems more complicated than it is.